Hello, everyone. This is Pedro Romero back at it again with a new interview for the channel. Thank you guys so much for coming back and listening to another one of my conversations with people within the esports scene. As for who I have for this occasion, we're going to be switching games to Dota 2 now. Um, this person that I have next to me is Avery SVG Silverman. He is a former professional Dota 2 player turned caster slash analyst who has been doing the latter part of the trade within a few years by now, covering various events such as um, majors, DPC seasons, and also another a set of events here and there. And so as of this moment in time, he has been able to give me the time to ask him questions about what he's been doing so far in his career and his casting and anything of the light. And so, SVG, thank you so much for taking the time and doing this interview. I really appreciate it. I just want
Yeah.
to start out with just a simple question as to like how you've been doing at this moment in time, given that DPC is wrapped up, Riyadh Masters is wrapped up, and now we're just basically in the period in waiting for TI 12.
Doing good. I mean, this was a really busy year. A lot of cool events, a lot of different style of events. We had some like huge ones like Riyadh that felt like a TI with a lot of money, which has created some very hype and high tension matches. And then you had on the flip side, you had like very chill events like Dream League that gave a lot of creative freedom. Chill in the sense of like there wasn't super strict or high pressure situations on the talent in terms of being, like 1,000% professional. Like they kind of want people to, mess around, create some more creative content, stuff like that. I think the casting can also be a bit looser on those types of games. So I think getting that balance between different styles of tournaments is pretty nice. And I feel like we had that throughout the year. We had tournaments across every region, including like the first big SA Premier tournament in the Lima Major, which was pretty cool. That crowd was very hype. I was very happy to attend that one. So I think overall it was like a pretty interesting and well balanced year for Dota too. A lot of years have been skewed one way or the other, like too many events, too little events. They're all in Europe. Some get canceled due to COVID for the last 3 or 4 years, right? So I feel like this year was like right back on track and pretty good if you look at it overall. And we still have a TI and a couple more events to go. So that's like even more insane to consider that this is all without TI yet. So I was very happy with this year overall.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanna grab your thoughts as to your recent experience in the Riyadh Masters, and it's one in which it generated a conversation as to like what level is it in terms of TI with the high amount of price pool. And so, what do you think of that difference? Does it how did you view the difference in importance, if you were able to discuss in that manner?
I think it's definitely the closest tournament we've had to a TI level event outside of TI itself, by far. The Whenever you put that amount of money on something, it's not necessarily about the money, but it just ups the stakes because people take it more seriously. And the second that happens, it kind of just auto generates a feedback response where everybody, like, because one team takes it more seriously, then the other teams are going to take it more seriously, right? And then it starts to snowball. And that event definitely had that feel to it. I think they're going to try and build it up to be larger and larger over the next couple of years as well, is kind of their overall game plan. So who knows where it'll end up? It could become like a completely equal to TI in the future. But obviously, TI has its own innate pressure that is you become a TI champion if you win it, which is impossible to replicate. But outside of that, it was very close. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see where this TI this year lands too, because they're probably gonna reduce the prize pool again by some margin, and taper back a bit as they've been doing. They talked about why. So we'll see where the feel of it and the pressure lies this year. But I think there is always that pressure of like, oh, you're playing for an Aegis of champions, and that affects players more than anything else. I think, even more than the money. But I think Riyadh was up there. Like I can't really remember a premier event outside of maybe if you go back 3 or 4 years ago, like some of the big majors or the epicenters, stuff like that, had like a larger than the premier land feel. But this was definitely the largest.
Yeah, and it definitely did it definitely had an array of great moments within games, not just like in the grand final, but in early rounds. I remember this one match in which Talent versus Liquid, I believe,
Yeah, I
and
am.
yeah, one member was already celebrating prematurely, and that eventually led to Liquid's victory. It was a very jam packed event, if I might say so myself, and so at the end of that event, it came with Spirit winning the event, winning the tournament, $5 million in the prize pool, and with that happening before TI 12. I'm kind of curious as do you feel like that's an indication, like a slight or more clear indication when it comes to deciding who's going to be like the contenders, who's going to be like in the middle of the pack, who's going to be in the bottom of the pack? Do you feel like that's going to be like an indicator as to what's to come in TI 12, or it was or do you not think as such?
I think it's like a rough indicator. It's hard to know. I think where the tournaments are actually has an effect on placement too. So the fact that TI will be in Seattle as opposed to Riyadh being in Saudi Arabia, which is kind of like similar time zones to Europe, definitely has a beneficial effect for a lot of the European and CIS teams. Whereas when they have to go to America, depending on like when and where they boot camp, sometimes it can be harder for people to boot camp in the US super far ahead of time. It has like a slight effect, but honestly, I think Team Spirit winning it. I mean, they're just a team that performs better under high pressure situations. I think it's clear at this point that's just how their team operates for whatever reason. So that being such a high, like pressure, high monetary value tournament definitely helped them and maybe hurt some other teams. So I think that can be like an indicator for TI, who's going to perform under TI pressure a bit more this year. But I think roughly those teams that did well are the teams that have been doing well most of the year. It's, the top four from Europe. Whoever qualifies these events from Europe has been doing very well. Bali, the top four from Europe at that event, were the top four European teams, right? Um, so you have those that are always going to, I think the expectation for those teams should be high at TI and will be high. They're not going to choke. They're not going to crumble, right? They're going to perform well. Just a question of who gets the final edge in like the top six. And then I think you have like the CIS teams that can get in that top six, which is Spirit, Bet Boom, and Nine Pandas, who are all pretty good contenders for those slots. And we'll see if China can show up between like LGD, Aster, whoever comes out of that last slot. Um, but otherwise, I think that's kind of what you're looking at in terms of expectation here. I think the NASA teams have been underperforming, and I think they're going to continue to struggle at TI unless we have like a dark horse run. I just think they've been too inconsistent. And outside of Talon for Southeast Asia, they've also been very hit or miss rate. But I think Talon can also do very well at TI because they performed really well at Riyadh. Like they had those, devastating losses versus Liquid, who have been their nemesis all year, but like they show up when it counts, and they're a very good late game team, which helps you on the high pressure lands. So I think those I would kind of expect all those teams I named and like out of the regions to continue to do well at this TI.
Yeah, and by how I view TI, it's a tournament in which nothing makes sense, and I say that in the sense that it doesn't matter what happens in the DPC. I mean, yeah, some things certain things do continue from the DPC up until TI, but still, it's only a matter of a team that gets hot, and once they get hot, there's literally nothing that can stop them. We already seen plenty of many examples over the years. I mean, I can't could just list them out. Spirit, TI 10, and then Tundra going in that. I think they only dropped around 2 matches throughout the entire run, and then
Mhm.
OG TI 9, and then TI 8, and then Wings TI 6. Basically, every team that goes hot in every single edition um, ends up winning the tournament. It's just a matter of, and it's just a matter of figuring out when they can pull that switch on and go on the run. And so, yeah, and such anticipation will be given out for the teams in every region throughout TI 12 and beyond. We'll see about that. But taking that direction from that to you, it's been another one of you. It's been another year of you working as a caster slash analyst, and so as of now, at the end of this point of the season, right before TI 12. How do you think you have accommodated to this role after being a player for plenty of years?
I think it was. I mean, it's been challenging to figure out the specifics of it, but I think the transition itself wasn't difficult in terms of, like the lifestyle components or the stress factors or the requirements or the knowledge that I could bring. I think that part of it is very natural for a lot of captains, especially who are ex Dota players, but most Dota pros can do it pretty well, to be honest. Because when you're good at Dota, you have to basically do the analytics for yourself regardless. And then if you're a captain or in any leadership position, you have to do it for your team. So generally, I think the captains do make the best analysts because they are forced into that position. So, like you have these no tails and sebs, right? They're amazing talent because they had to do it for so long. But I think almost any player can do it to some degree, and we see a lot of these players on the talent side in general in like guest appearances, right? And I think it's just a product of like to get to that point as a professional player in the first place, you have to be able to analyze Dota, understand it, and develop it as a skill set. And that innately makes you a good analyst because that means you can look at games or look at drafts and do that at a pretty rapid pace. I think the other factors are like communication skills, charisma, stage presence, your synergy with other talent, right? All of these things are not guaranteed to be there just because you're a pro player. I think that's what makes like a S tier talent compared to just an S tier pro player. But I think if you have the ability to build those up or you have the ability to work on those, then you can get there. I think in my case, those were definitely the lacking part, but I believe in myself to like work on stuff and improve it. And I feel like I've improved those things a long way. There's still stuff I'm working on, but overall, I think the last year and a half to two has been pretty productive and I've come a long way. That's how I feel personally. Also, how I feel based on feedback from people. So I'm pretty satisfied with the transition and where I am now and the product I'm delivering. And I think as long as I still feel like there's room to grow that product or improve it, then there's something to work towards and that'll satisfy me.
You mentioned about certain attributes that highlight a particular individual, be it a player or a caster or anything of that like. Which attribute do you feel like is highlighted within you specifically, and why?
As a talent side, you mean? Like, uh, I think I mean, I think my game understanding is very high. I think I think that's pretty true of any captain. It just has to be, otherwise, like, what are you doing to a sense? So I think as an analyst, that's pretty much the best trait you can bring as an analyst. If you look at any of these other top tier analysts that fill that role within the caster duo specifically, right? I think that is like the number one thing people, if you have that, then it just creates a nice backbone. You can always go to it. You can always rely on it. It can be niche too, right? Like you can specialize your game knowledge into mechanics. You can specialize it into meta understanding. You can specialize it into the game flow itemization. It can actually, doesn't have to be everything. It can be certain things. And I think that actually is what something that can make certain analysts stand out as opposed to others. But it has to be there in some capacity because I just think that's like the fundamental core value of your job. It's like to provide an understanding of the game and translate it to the viewer. The other component of that is the translation to the viewer in terms of the better you can communicate that understanding and the ideas and why it's important or what's important, the better the cast is going to be. So that's the part that I think I've worked on a lot, and I think hopefully shines, because I try not to just think about what I'm saying, but how I'm saying it and how it fits into the overall picture of the game a lot more. Because between me and Cap, our primary focus with the cast is like telling the story of the game. Like, what is the story of this game? Where does it start? Where does it end? Where does it go in between? Where is the hype getting built up and for what? And part of that is when you relay an analysis of the game, whether it's the items people are building, the way they want to take a fight, you ideally want to be doing that in a way that helps build that story, right? And so that's the part that I find very interesting and what I've tried to work on the most is like, just because I think something's cool doesn't necessarily mean it fits into this game. Or just because I can talk about something doesn't mean I should. And the way I talk about something, I can use it as a side piece. I can use it as the main arc. This can be the most important item in the game. It can be the least important item in the game, right? So that changes a lot about how I view things. which I think is interesting too, and something I focused on. So I hope that's something that shines through in our cast, is like the way we build up a game and present it. I think ideally is what makes our duo different than other duos. Not better or worse, but just like the aspect that we bring, right? So that's how I view my role in that.
Yeah, and it also brings about a sense of, of adaptability because, as you described it, you got to make sure that once a certain situation comes up or a certain event that happens, you got to be sure you got to think on the feet and make sure you eloquently describe it in a way that the audience sufficiently understands it, and it's one that so far has been doing so well for you in particular, SPG. And so, taking that perspective from your end to the public's end, how do you think you have seen the public's reaction towards your casting and how you have taken in any sort of feedback that they have given you throughout this season?
Yeah, they definitely give a lot of feedback. I think I definitely taken a lot of it. I try to read as much actual feedback as I can. There's a lot of feedback that is it's just people expressing their emotional reaction to casting, which is a big component because I mean, as a caster, you're basically eliciting an emotional response from people, and so that can people can love that. They can also hate it, and so you have to filter through that a bit because just because someone hates what you're doing doesn't necessarily make it bad. Like that's weird to say, but it basically there's going to be people who prefer certain styles or certain approaches, and they're just not going to like. There's going to be a certain portion of people that don't like what you do because it doesn't resonate with them. And no matter what you do in any entertainment industry, right? Um, like I grew up watching a lot of stand-up comedy, for example, and some of the greatest stand-up comics of all time had like crowds where the crowds just hated them or they booed them, right? But does that like mean they're a terrible stand-up comic? No, like it doesn't even mean the material's necessarily bad, right? It just means it doesn't resonate with people. So that's always a portion of it, which I've come to understand a bit more. But there's also a lot of feedback that is useful in terms of individual people being like, this didn't work for me or this didn't feel right. And sometimes those can overlap, right? Sometimes people have a very visceral emotional response, but it is part of that is based on the fact that you were doing something that was like not objectively bad, but bad for them as a viewer that you can look at and be like, all right, I understand why that puts someone off and I'm going to try and work on it. So for me specifically, a lot of that was, I think it still is too. Basically, how I say things is the biggest factor. I've not had a lot of feedback in terms of like what this person is saying is bad or I don't like it. It's more of how it's said. So relating an emotional response through my words, the hype levels, like the tone, the biasing, or whatever that people complain about, even though it's not purposefully there. Like sometimes maybe you get sucked up in a team too much, right? It's all this type of stuff that is most of the stuff I receive feedback on that I try and improve. And then the other source is Cap, right? So Cap is like one of, if not maybe the longest tenured caster still in Dota. And so I've gone to him a lot in terms of what feels right or what feels wrong, or from his perspective, what is working, what isn't, what I need to improve. So his feedback is the most valuable to me because it's backed on a decade plus of experience, and he's worked with multiple co-casters as well, right, with multiple different styles. So I trust him a lot, and he's given me a lot of stuff that I think has gotten better over time. It's still a work in progress. I think I'm not the most natural emotion driven person in terms of how I talk or how I relate ideas. So that is something I have to like really overemphasize. Like it feels like I'm overemphasizing it, right? But to the viewer, it might just feel like that I'm a normal person. So
It does feel like you're explaining it like as if it's not really that big of a deal, you know.
yeah, because I don't think for a lot of people, I don't think it is. Like for me, that's like my biggest challenge as a caster. But I think for a lot of casters, that's probably like the thing they do normally, you know. Um, and so I think everybody works on different stuff. I think I don't view it as like a flaw or something. I just view it as the way I can make my product better. Um, but I think that is probably the thing I've received the most feedback on. I still get it too. Like if I go and cast a big tournament, there'll still be some comments of like, "Oh, this guy doesn't bring hype," or He doesn't relay stuff that's exciting to this type of thing. And if I go and watch my cast now as opposed to like 2 years ago, it's a world of difference. I think that has improved considerably. But is it at 100%? No, right? And so there's still room for me to grow. But that's why I like what I do, because I think the day where I feel like there's nothing to work on is the day my job will become less exciting, if that day ever exists. Which hopefully it won't. But for now, it is definitely the case.
And hopefully that infamous day won't ever happen to you in particular. Has there been a piece of criticism, or not criticism, but has there been a piece of feedback that you received from anyone, be it fan or fellow peer, that made you stop to think and think to yourself, man, I didn't really consider that before. Has that moment ever happened to you?
Uh, to a very specific degree, no. I don't think so. There's been some small things Cap has told me in terms of like word repetition or like overused phrases and stuff that you don't realize maybe you're saying a lot. And I've gotten definitely gotten some feedback from like other on the production side, jokingly, that's like I say certain words too much, um, and then you have to go to the source and look up 10 synonyms or whatever and put them in your mental bank so you can vary it out so you're not saying the same thing over and over. But the reason it stood out to me is not because I think it's surprising, but I think if you actually think about it and you go and listen to anybody who casts, everybody has their version of like their 5 or 6 words or phrases that they say over. They say way too much. And then it's like, oh, this person says this a lot. But it's also part of your brand or your personality to a degree too, right? Like
Yeah, it's
everybody has their own
a
vernacular.
catchphrase. It's like a
Yes.
catchphrase. Yeah.
Yes. And so I don't think I have catchphrases or anything. Certain casters did actually. But it is something that was like pretty specific that I did try and mix up a bit. Anytime like I get Cap tells me you say this word too much, I will try and vary it because I just think it makes a better product in the end. And it is something I think viewers notice too. But on the flip side, it can be something that you build into your brand or like, right, like repetition's not necessarily bad. So it's about how you balance it or what you're trying to accomplish with it as well. Um, so that is something that stood out, but nothing like incredibly bad. There wasn't anything I've ever received in terms of feedback. It's like you're doing this, and I was like, oh, dear God, that's awful or something. But maybe I was doing stuff like that, but I never received it. So in that sense, it hasn't been too soul destroying.
Yeah, it's just been a process of just continuing to improve, and it's sort and yeah, like it's like a never-ending train. The process never stops, and
Mhm.
such is the way for casters. I've talked to many other casters in different games, and I feel like that sort of sense of continuous improvement has been felt no matter the level they're at, and also no matter the amount of experience that they've had under their belts. And yeah, it really is a testament to how this sort of process, it doesn't really stop for you and anyone else, and even including Cap, because like sometimes Cap encounters those moments in which he tweaks his casting, and he improves on that and builds off of that, and then just continues to be at the top of his game. And the same goes for you, and same goes for everyone else within the casting scene, be it Dota or any other game. Um, Earlier on in one of your answers, you mentioned the stand-up comedians. I want to ask, who's your favorite?
Uh, I mean, now it's more controversial, but I really like the old Dave Chappelle specials.
Mm.
I think the old Dave Chappelle specials are like S tier comedy in terms of delivery, material, where he came from, like what he's trying to say with it. I think those are like 10 out of 10. I really like a lot of the old George Carlin stuff as well. I think those are like easy answers, but I think Carlin was very ahead of his time and also a very unique comedian. He like blended the line between these like long philosophical diatribes with getting people to like laugh at themselves in an almost weird, creepy, ironic way, like society wise. So those are the two I would like easily name off the top of my head.
Then I also must assume that you've seen the Dave Chappelle show. then I gotta ask,
Yes. Yeah.
what's your favorite what's your favorite skit?
I mean, the Hollywood stories with Charlie Murphy, those are those are just classic. I always tell people that they did the skits on those with like Rick James and Charlie Murphy and all that, right? That are like the famous skits, but they actually have the like unedited videos that are just they're like this 15 or 20-minute long videos of Charlie Murphy telling those stories with Rick James or whatever that are just like they were basically the narration that went behind the skits that ended up in the show. And I actually like those more. I think those stories are just hilarious. I don't know if they're that appropriate anymore, but they were like the way they get told and stuff was it was just hilarious for the time.
I really like the I really like Chappelle's skit on the Iraq War, and especially the one part in which he says, in which they were talking, in which the press asked him about like the U.S. attacking the country for oil or something like that. And he was like oil, like talking about oil. Who's cooking? Like something like that.
Yeah.
That's like one of my favorite skits out there. And then I might then I'll ask like one or not ask. I'll say that one of my favorite stand-up comedians is George Lopez, mostly
Mm,
because of his comedy is hits close to home. Like he sort of delivers a comedy that resonates to people in terms it being of it being um relative to how the ordinary people lives their ordinary lives. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting person that I listen to here and there, not as much as I would like
mhm.
with my current stuff in esports, but still, such is the way that I like my stand-up comedy. But yeah, Carlin and Chappelle for excellent takes, excellent people, excellent minds, excellent funny people back in their day. And I want to now tackle on to your partnership with Cap because he is someone that you've highlighted plenty of times so far in this conversation. And it's one in which you've built a particular partnership with in terms of your casting since the start of your casting days within the DPC. And so, how has that dynamic between you and him evolved from the start of your partnership?
Very well, I think overall. That's the simple answer. I think we are similar people in a lot of ways. So like I think we're people that would naturally get along very well, even if we weren't in a professional partnership. Or like he's a very introverted person, which probably a lot of people don't know, because he's like this big boisterous play-by-play guy, right? Um, but he's actually like he's pretty quiet. He's like me. He doesn't mind alone time. He doesn't mind just chilling, um, doing like small relaxed stuff. Like you can sit in a room with him and not say anything for 2 hours, and it's like easy. That's how I kind of am too sometimes. So it makes it very nice because there's not a lot of pressure between either of us to like deliver on anything or do something the other person doesn't want to do or something like that. We just gel very well, which is nice because honestly, he's become one of my closest friends, and it's very nice to have someone like that you can also build something professionally with, right? Um, I think it's the same when you're on like Dota teams. Um, it's just very complicated because in those it's not two people with one relationship, it's like 5 or 6 people with like 20 or 30, right? And that web becomes very tangled very quickly, and it's hard to maintain good relationships when there's so many to manage. And it's one of the things about being a player that I don't miss because it always felt like you couldn't maintain those relationships as well as you wanted to. Like I wish I could have a close friendship and a working relationship with everybody on my team to as good a capacity, but it's just like not possible a lot of times because there's too much to do. But when you're in a casting duo, it's just like you and one person, so you can do that, and it feels a lot better. It feels like more natural. There's less drama going on. It's simpler. So that part of it I enjoy, and he's a great person. If you talk to anybody about like his love for Dota, how much he's put into the game, how much he's made it his life, how much he's tried to help other people through what he's done as well. I think it all shows, and I think it's hard pressed to find anybody who would fault his character. So, in that sense, like I don't doubt that I'm working with someone who's a good person as well, which also helps. So I think there are a lot of people in esports who have bad motivations. Not that they're bad people, but it's very easy to have bad motivations, or maybe not even bad, but like greedy or selfish motivation, right? Because I think that's a lot of the world too. Like, I mean, that's just, where there's money and where there's money that isn't based on necessarily a lot of boundaries in the way, then things get very greedy, selfish very quickly. Or people that just maybe make bad decisions out of ignorance or inexperience. Like esports has a lot of young people with not a lot of experience because it's a new industry. I'm not faulting them necessarily, but like it can lead to a lot of shady stuff, right? You have orgs that don't pay people, you have tournaments that don't pay people, you have organizations that just go under or go bankrupt and like all these things, and you're supposed to be building working relationships with all these people while at the same time they're like pulling the rug out from under you, right? Either nefariously or out of just bad business practice or whatever it is. It can feel like you're just like driving over potholes all the time. So working with people that you know are good people and are going to act in good faith goes a long way towards having those people around you in esports, especially, I think, because it just means you have something to rely on, and like you're not worried about this guy. I don't have to sit here and be worried. Oh, Cap's gonna like retire next year without saying anything, or he's gonna steal money from me, or like it sounds ridiculous, but like things happen a lot more than people talk about because a lot of times they're just not talked about because like people don't want to go public with this stuff, right? Either for legal purposes or job purposes, because it can hurt you too, right? Um, so I think the Dota talent community in general are all very good people in that sense, and that helps. So I think you combine all that, and it's a it's made my life incredibly easy. I'm very thankful for it. Every interview I do, and every time I ever get asked this, I will say like I could not ask for anybody better to work with, and I wouldn't ask for anybody better to work with. I also think from the casting standpoint, we're on mainly the same page in terms of like the product we want to develop. And he's worked with similar co-casters in the past, right? Like ex pros that bring a more analytical side that he can balance out with his hype in casting. And I think he's used to making that work and being the person that will meet them more than halfway, as opposed to the onus having been on me to meet him more than halfway. So that also made my life easier. Um, so yeah, like I have nothing but good things to say about him, and he has made my life better in a lot of ways. So I'm very thankful for that.
And from the start of your time casting and calling games, it has basically been you and him just from the start, from the time in which you retired from being a player up until now. And so, what made this partnership possible? Following your pro player days with Cap in particular, given that he's basically the only one that you've been working with, aside from a few people here and there over the years, you know. But what about um what caused this relationship with Cap that stood out to you and the rest of your other peers?
I mean, the logistical answer was he didn't really have a standard casting partner at the time where I went into talent work. So it was like, am I going to go up to Odie and try and kick Fog out? No, right? You work with who's willing to work with you to degree, but at the same time, he is someone who I talked to a long time ago. Like maybe even going back 4 years plus, when I was still kind of playing. Like I can't tell you the exact time, but there was a part where I was debating trying to do some talent work then, and I talked to him about casting a long time ago. He was someone I approached, or maybe he approached me. I don't even remember. I'm not trying to take credit for it. I was just saying there was some existing nature of like, hey, we thought we could maybe create something good, even way longer back. So when I came into talent, it was pretty natural that I would want to work with him as well. And the main reason is, again, I had heard that he's a very good person. So like I had friends who recommended him as a person and a guy to work with, since he's very hardworking, which matches me. And he is also someone who I think one of his best strengths is he can extract and bring the most out of his co-caster in terms of the knowledge and like letting them, maybe not letting them shine, but like getting them to be balanced out in a duo. I think he can do that better than almost anybody. And so that was something that I valued a lot since I knew that I was going to have a lot of knowledge I can bring in the cast, but not necessarily some of the other stuff or the easiest ways to bring it out in the initial phases. So the fact that he could do that very easily and set it up very naturally meant I had more cushion and more working room because there's a high chance that if I went in and tried to build a duo with someone new, for example, like if I picked someone who was maybe at the same point I was in terms of the talent scene, who like wanted to get into talent and wanted to do casting, whatever, but didn't necessarily understand or wasn't able to do all the things at a high tier level, that it honestly probably wouldn't have gotten very far. Because I think that's how bad I was. So the fact that he could just cushion that and create a lot of breathing room and give me time to like learn and improve at this stuff while the product still being good enough that we could go to the tournaments and get that experience is like absolutely huge. And not something I take for granted. So that's like an invaluable opportunity that is pretty impossible to pass up. Like I would have to be pretty naive or egotistical to think that I could get to the same point without someone like him. And he was willing to take the chance on me because I think he saw the potential in the end stage for how good we could be together based on what I brought to the table. At least I hope that's the case. I don't know. Maybe maybe it was just luck or whatever. But I think we both saw the potential, and then it was just a question of will we be able to get there or not. Which there's always risk. Like it's hard to know.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that if I asked the same kind of questions to Cap, he'd probably say the same sort of positive and praise to you, given that you guys been at it for a few years and have been able to cast a few grand finals and also another set of important matches over throughout the existence of this duo. And with Cap, what do you think is the single biggest thing that he helped you flesh out? You know, what was the biggest thing that improved and got to the point in which um it became one of the focal points for you and your casting, and why?
I mean, definitely the hype. I'm not a very naturally hyped or emotional person, as I stated before. And so you have to be when you cast, and not only that, you have to like what you think is your one level 100 out of 100 has to be like 200. Like it all has to get scaled up, so it's all bigger than life because when it goes through the camera, so to say, it gets dropped down. Or at least this is how it's worked for me. So like not only do I have to overdo it to seem like a normal human, then I have to like take that and ramp it up like 2x so that it's at like a hype broadcast level. So then when it goes through the camera to the viewer who's sitting in their room at home, who may not be in an auditorium that is naturally hype and naturally gives you that feeling, it feels like you are, right? That's the goal. Like you want to make the viewer who's watching don't feel like they're in the arena at TI with the crowd noise and all of that. And obviously having crowd noise and that stuff helps. I think it's like a crutch, like you can fall back on it sometimes, but you don't always necessarily have that. Like Riyadh, I think is a great example, right? Riyadh had a lot of hype. The series and a lot of the matches there were incredibly hyped. They were a good series. The games were really long. It's very high stakes, a lot of money. But they also had a smaller crowd, which is something they might change in the future. But it was the case for that tournament. And so you don't have this like 10,000 person stadium with insane crowd noise going into the mics that can compensate for maybe you not being as hyped as a caster. The flip side is if you do have that 10,000 person stadium and whatever that is bringing the hype, then you have to bring even more because if you don't match it, it'll reflect even worse, right? Like this guy's doing some normal cast when there's like 10,000 people screaming, it sounds even worse. So it like can bring you up, but you have to meet it and match it and take advantage of it. And that is something that I think helps me. It's definitely something that helps Cap. I think Cap is his best when he's in that type of environment. Like I think he hits a different level. And I think it's a lot of times our best casts are the most hyped games because I think it brings out the most of him, and then I will try and keep up with him. And that ends up creating like the best product that I think we can deliver. And those are like the games I look forward to the most. So I think that's something he's helped me with is figuring out how I can match him or do it in my own way, while at the same time trying not to like overlap with him, which is still something I'm trying to figure out. But think it's slowly getting better. Still working on it.
One of the most memorable moments or memorable hype moments that Cap delivered during a cast was, I think, game one or game two of Secret versus Maneski in TI9, in which I think Secret went for the base, tried to get it, tried to end the game, but Maneski held on, and then they defended their base and then pushed on towards the Secret's base to win it, and then extended to game three or extend the series. Um,
Hmm.
it's a moment in which I saw it live. I was pretty energized, if I might say so myself, and it was I knew right then and there was going to be a memorable moment, and look and going flipping the coin to the other side. What's your most hype moment that you've experienced or that you've had as a caster?
It was probably It was probably TI11 in Singapore, the Thunder Awake and Liquid series. I think that series was like that was definitely the most ridiculous series I've casted. Uh, and probably looking back, wish I could have been better at the time to have done it more justice. I still think our cast was good for that series. I don't think like it was bad by any means, but that was like a ridiculous series. It just had everything. It had like long games. It had like a short stomp in the middle to give it some breathing room. It had mega creeps. It had uh, like throws. It had 1 HP team fights. I mean, it's just a ridiculous game. It had the storylines of like
Yeah.
Liquid from the LCQ on the brink of like getting knocked down. Right? It's just everything. So that series was absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, I was pulling for Thunder Awaken to win it and get to top four. I think that was a match in top six, so that would have. I think at that point, Awaken broke the previous record of a South American team placing high in TI
Yes.
top eight. Yeah, yeah, and so top six, and I wanted them to get to top four at the very least,
Yep.
but TL just had to pull off that last minute gasp, and it was definitely a very memorable series. That, if I might say so myself, for TI11. Hopefully, we'll get more um heart attack relative moments in TI12 in Seattle. And when it comes to you back to being a talent uh between 2022 and 2023, of course you had 2021 in which you worked in TI10, but only as a as like a guest or something like that, or like an analyst for only that event. um what has undergone the biggest change for you between 2022 and this year?
Uh, I think the biggest change has just been me finding more of my individual self brand wise and personality wise as a talent. I think the first year I was very focused on the mechanical aspects of it. Like I viewed it as building a skill set that would make me better at my job and what does that look like and improving those skills and trying to get that quality as high as possible. And this year, I think it was more about me just trying to bring more of myself and my personality and my humor and like these other more creative aspects to my job in terms of the brand, the individual personality, and the casting itself. And I think that has been very enjoyable and hopefully something that has also been fun for most viewers, which I think it has been. I think it's also something that can generate more divisiveness whenever you do that because it's just like you're doing something that makes you a more not extreme person, but a more standout personality, right? So basically, if you go in and I think if you do the talent job and you're like you're just like very objective about everything. It's rare that that will generate a lot of extreme feedback, positive or negative, because there's not. It's like you're not saying anything crazy, right? If you go on and you just it's I always use like people I think people talk about Kyle or Swindles a lot because I think Swindles was one of the first talent who really became very polarizing. He basically ramped up like he would just say things, he would say things very assertively, and I think that's good to do as a talent because it makes you more interesting, it makes you stand out, it makes you different. He wasn't afraid to just be horribly wrong repeatedly and make like a fool of himself to some degree. At the same time, it made him very polarizing, right? You suddenly went from a guy who was like most people really enjoyed watching him. To like, there's a coalition that absolutely hates him, and there's this coalition that absolutely loves him. Think all the talent should be more like him, you know. And I think that happens kind of naturally, no matter what. The more you bring out of yourself, maybe there's a balance in the middle, but it's something I've noticed. Like the response is definitely amped up a bit as I've tried to bring more of myself into the cast and stuff. Some of it works, some of it definitely doesn't. Um, which is also something to judge based on the feedback. But I think it's an interesting part that has definitely been different this year than last year. Uh, is that, you know, like if I go on a cast, I can definitely feel that more people are responding to me being in the cast rather than just the cast itself, if that makes sense. Um, like I'm bringing some individual brand value or personality value to that product, as opposed to before where it was just there's a cast going on and I happen to be in it, but like do people know it's me casting or are they looking forward to me casting? Not necessarily. That has definitely changed. Um, I don't know to what degree, but I've definitely felt it, and so that is also something I try and work on more. And it is something that I've noticed is, you know, it's made my casts more polarizing to some degree. I think more people, the people that like them, maybe like it more. Like it feels more unique to them, and it's definitely created a larger group of people that are like, oh, I actually don't like this guy, or I don't like the way he says things, or the way he jokes about things, or whatever. I don't find it funny. I find him cringe, whatever, you know. But I think I'm also becoming more and more okay with that. Like I'd rather be polarizing than not be polarizing. I think. Not to say that I'm a very polarizing talent, because I don't think I'm like Swindle's level or like Quinn as a player is very polarizing. Right? I don't think I'm not saying I'm at that level, but I think I'd rather just be me and like if people love or hate that, whatever.
Yeah, and in a sense, you could substitute polarizing and say like popular, because like when it comes to the things that you described, you know, building a brand, building an audience, you know, it that then leads to how people view your work, be it a player or a caster, talent creator, content creator, whatever. It's an interesting subject about building a brand in a game such as Dota 2. I've talked to plenty of people that have focused into building a brand besides, you know, their work within the game. You know, examples, Slacks twice, and then I talked to
Hmm.
Saberlight about, you know, his his turn or his comedic side of himself, and it's
Right.
something that he was been focusing on, you know, for a little while. And about that, you mentioned in your previous answer that there's a sense of divisiveness towards that line in particular. Why do you think that that's the case?
Uh, I think it's just because whenever you take, basically, when you build up your brand and personality, I think a big core of it is you're taking stronger stances on ideas or opinions. And whenever you do that on the internet, you're bound to basically pull out more haters who like, not necessarily hate on you, but they disagree with those very strong opinions. So I think Dota is also a very divisive game in terms of you can view the game a lot of ways, and a lot of people can have a lot of confidence in their ideas or their viewpoints that aren't necessarily 100% accurate. Not that that makes them wrong, but Dota, like the more I played it for almost 10 plus years now, Dota's not necessarily about being right or wrong. It's about how much you can extract from your ideas and make them useful. And that can come from anywhere. It can come from a terrible idea, it can come from a great idea. But a lot of people are stuck in their methodology of, I think my way of viewing this situation is correct. So like it can happen objectively, it can happen subjectively, but you know, you can talk about how, let's say I go on a draft panel and I can do that draft panel two ways. I can do that draft panel where I say like I just give an analysis of the heroes and what they could do and what a team might use them for. And I think that would be a very objective way to do it, and it would be a very unpolarizing way to do it. Because there's not much to disagree with, right? I can be like, okay, they pick Crystal Maiden. They're gonna probably try and use this Crystal Maiden to push out waves and control more of the map. That's something they can look for. That's what they're trying to do with the hero. Very unpolarizing. There's not many people are going to be like, well, I completely disagree with this guy's analysis of what this hero can do because, I mean, it's just what the hero can do, right? But if I go on that draft analysis and I want to make it more polarizing and I say like this Crystal Maiden pick is absolutely terrible. It has like absolute dog win rate. There's no reason they should be picking this hero. This hero has no place in the meta. Whatever it is, right? Even if you want to make it more polarizing analysis, like I think the only use this hero has is to max frostbite and go kill creeps in the jungle. That would be like a very polarizing view of the hero. Then you're probably going to make a lot of people either happy or angry at that because it might pan out in the game, it might not. You go and play this game, maybe the Crystal Maiden doesn't even skill frostbite and doesn't hit a single creep. Well, then do you look stupid? Do you look like a fool? If you do that enough, do you end up as a talent where people say, like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about? He just says crazy things that make no sense, right? Then all of a sudden you're becoming a very polarizing talent because now you're just like saying very strong ideas that people are going to disagree with in any capacity. Whether that person's right or whether you're right, it almost doesn't matter. You're just creating a situation where there's disagreement and the debate can't really happen because it's a one-way street, right? Like,
it's interesting you bring that up because there's been occasions in which a caster talks about like a composition for a game. And this is another game that I'm going to bring up, and how a certain team is not going to do well, or a certain composition is not going to do well, and then the opposite ends up happening,
mhm,
and then leads to the audience, lambasting or just piling on to that person,
yes.
a caster. An obvious example is Sideshow from Valorant. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that game, but he's a caster that has time and again, brought in his takes as to how the competitive scene is going to play out, or how an agent composition is going to play out in a given map and also in a given match, given
Mm,
in a given team, etc., etc. But instead of him taking in the criticism or the response from the crowd and also his peers in a negative light, he has turned it into like in a comedic way in which people are calling him like a clown, or something like that, and then he just buys into it, and it
mhm,
sort of puts him in a sort of like um it puts him like in a endearing light, as like a as like as like someone who is knowledgeable about the game, and although he might not be correct within his line of thinking, it still brings about a sense of community, and it's also a sense of like um relaxation and also discussion, whatever
mhm,
the case, be it positive or negative, about him and also the things that he's talking about. It's very prevalent in games like Valorant and also League of Legends and other titles. And I feel like that's not, and I feel like from how you described it, it's not really the case in Dota 2. One has to go about it a particular way, just so that they won't receive like plenty of criticism, like negative criticism, and stuff like that. Do you feel like that sort of difference exists between Dota and other games, or not?
I think there is some innate difference. I think that's a very good example of what I was talking about in a sense of if you're willing to make that part of your personality, you can, and you can like go down that road, but you kind of have to be happy with that outcome, right? Like maybe you have to be happy with being a person who can make that like clowniness or being wrong endearing, but you have to be okay with that. And this is actually something that me and Cap talked about a lot for me as an analyst. I remember having multiple discussions with him at certain points in terms of as a Dota analyst, is it better if I say things that I know of like a higher degree of being true but are safer, or is it better if I say things that are a lower degree of being true in the game but are more decisive? Um, so like going back to that example, right? I could say, you know, I think, like I could say the same thing two ways. I can say, I think the best way for them to take this team fight is they jump the backline. That's one statement. I can also say that statement in terms of like the only way they're going to win this team fight is if they jump the line in the back. They need vision on the line. They have to jump the line. There's no other way they can win a team fight. That's a more that's a more decisive version of that same statement. Maybe by a slight margin, but it is, right? Because what can happen is we play that game and maybe they don't jump the back line at all. Maybe they don't jump the line at all, right? They just go in to the team fight face first, and my statement looks horribly incorrect. So what that does is it does it devalue me as an analyst, right? Because I made a prediction, the prediction was horribly wrong. Now the viewers are like, oh, this guy said they have to do this and they didn't, and they clearly didn't, and they still won. Well, that he's like he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? But what it can also do is it can set up a situation where then you can be like, damn, I didn't think they could win that team fight doing like that. And here's how they did it. And that's even more interesting because it surprised me, right? And now I'm learning with you as a viewer. And it creates a situation where even I, as an analyst, can be wrong about something or misread the situation. And it leads to us all discovering something cool in the game that we didn't think was there. And that creates a story. And like something we talked about is that that's a better end situation than just being conservative on all of your opinions or predictions, because then you're not setting anything up. You're not setting up a surprise or like a crazy outcome or something that none of us saw. Because if I don't see something and it surprises me genuinely, then it's probably something really cool. And if I set it up for like that, that's better, even at my own expense. The issue in Dota compared to other games, I think, is that when you start doing that a lot, Dota's a very knowledge-based game, and a lot of your value as a player, coach, professional, whatever it is, and that bleeds over into the talent side as an analyst, is how much you know about the game and how much you're right in a sense of like, if you can go on and predict even something as simple as predicting a draft pick is like, boom, 10 head explosions. Everyone's like, oh, this guy's like Dota god, right? Because he went on there and predicted a draft pick. But in actuality, it's like, okay, like that's cool. It is a valuable trait. It does create something interesting for the broadcast. But at the same time, it's is it like is it equally as impressive as it is equally bad if someone goes up on there and can't predict a draft pick, right? Does that mean they're suddenly not a good talent because they don't possess that knowledge? And I think a lot of times in Dota, it's viewed as like you need a certain minimum amount of knowledge to be good at it, and then there's some leeway. But the more and more knowledge you have is just a better and better thing. And so the second you start to devalue that, it's viewed very negatively. Um, and that's where I go back to your example, right? If I put myself in a position as a talent or an analyst where I start to laugh at myself in terms of my being wrong on every prediction or my not knowing what's going to happen in this game. Like if I go on draft panel and I predict 100 picks in a row and they're all incorrect and it becomes a meme and, oh, this guy's every prediction he makes is wrong, haha. I can make that into my brand. I can make it endearing. I can claim it as my own and it'll make me a more interesting personality. But I do think there's a portion of the Dota community that'll be like, this guy actually gets a lot of stuff wrong, and I don't know if I trust his analysis because at the core of it, Dota is a very analytical game. Like, there's a huge amount of stats, there's a huge amount of drafting and meta strategy. There's macro strategy, there's micro strategy, there's laning, there's team fighting, there's itemization. There's so many detail-oriented components that having someone who's knowledgeable on that and brings the confidence in that knowledge it's just like it goes back to what I said. It's like the cornerstone of any analyst, right? That has to be there to some capacity. And so that's a balancing act. Like, how much can you maintain the confidence that I know what I'm talking about and I'm very smart and I've studied this game, and also joke about it and be endearing and like, hey, sometimes I don't know, or I fucked up or whatever, right? You have to I think you want to be somewhere at, the 2/3 of the middle or whatever that looks like. It probably varies from person to person. Like someone like Jenkins can be more clowny, right? And mess around. Someone like a Seb or Faith Beyond might want to be more analytical and not joke around as much and just play more off the fact that they're like knowledge gods of the game. I think that's perfectly fine, right? You can build personality on either side of that.
And I think the biggest example within the player side is Noto, because he's a very funny dude, a very
Hmm.
warm-hearted person, and it's something that has um uh caught the attention of the community throughout his days as a pro player. I feel like that's one of the biggest examples. He can be he can be lax, he can be funny, he can be stuff like that. But at the end of the day, he can also be a good player, and it's a matter of just finding a balance between either being serious or not serious. But it's kind of difficult to do that also in a way such as the game. In this game, in particular, because of the things that you described.
Yes, that balancing act is one of the hardest because Dota's a very complex game. It's a very complicated game with a lot going on. You have to translate that complexity, especially in a cast in real time, to a viewer base that can vary widely. Particularly if we're talking about TI, right? TI brings in a huge amount of viewership that does not necessarily watch all the events during the whole year. Doesn't necessarily know what the meta has been developing. They don't know what the last balance patch might even be, right? On some of these final days, you're talking about almost like a million English viewers or whatever it is. That's like 900,000 more than might be English viewership on a normal cast, right? Now, obviously, I'm not, live viewership, the concurrent viewers, maybe there's 10 million people that watch, whatever. I'm just saying rough numbers. Even if it's 50% more, it changes your audience widely. And then you're at a point where, like, well, what do I actually want to translate? Who am I catering to? That might change depending on what you want to bring as a talent. Like, I'm always going and try and cater to the hardcore Dota fans to a degree. More, like I'm gonna assume that people watching understand the memes of the players or the memes of the teams or the in-game mechanics, right? Because I think at that point, like you have to do the game justice. But yeah, like that balancing act between respecting the complexity and the seriousness of Dota, but also making it fun and enjoyable, or joking about things, is a constant challenge, I think, for the Dota talent scene. And it's what makes the job interesting because I think there's also part of me that views it as like, I mean, this is TI 12, right? That is kind of ridiculous to think about. Like, we are at the 12th TI. And what that means is every TI we go into, especially as we go deeper into the tournament, part of me says, like, this is the ultimate challenge for all these players. It's the ultimate dream. It represents 10 to 15 years of work for a lot of these dudes. I was there competing at it. I know what it means and how much goes into it. And that deserves 100% of the respect from the talent and casters, right? And on the other side of that coin is like this, this other voice that says, well, Dota is in its 12th year and it might go 20 years, it might go 30, it might go two more, like you never know. And a lot of the viewers that are still watching Dota are viewers that have been watching Dota forever. Like that's just the reality, There's not there's not huge amounts of viewership that come in. At TI there is more than other tournaments, but the people that are watching it, like they really watch Dota and they've been watching it a long time. And I think there's something to be said about just making it an enjoyable experience, and it doesn't have to be 100% serious, right? Now, if we're talking a TI Grand Final, that's about as close as you get to the 100% experience, right? You ramp up into that. But a lot of other stuff in Dota, I think, is like it's more about just having fun with it and enjoying the Dota and respecting it where it's applicable and also finding that balance. And sometimes you get it wrong, sometimes you get it right, but I think there's some truth of like, I bring up like small examples of like you'll watch some game and I could go in every game as a caster and talk about the laning phase and like what I think some team did wrong on their safe lane, right? I could do that every single game if I wanted to. But like I kind of go in assuming that me and all the viewers have watched probably 1,000 Dota games. And do they like, it's in certain games I've talked about that stuff, and do they want to hear that for 100 more, right? Or do they just kind of want to have fun and watch this game and watch the crazy stuff that happens, or hear some wacky story about a player, or like do some of this stuff, right? And I think sometimes that's totally fine. And obviously, it's dependent on the venue and the status and the hype, and TI is different than a Dream League, for example. But I do think there's a balance in there too between like how much do you respect Dota, how far it's come. I tend to lean towards that direction, honestly. Like I will always try and respect the game when the seriousness calls for it. But I also think sometimes people get too upset that talent try and just create like be more creative or joke about stuff because it's like, we're gonna be going into our 13th year of competitive Dota. It's like just have fun with it and enjoy it while you can because you don't know how long esports is going to be here and the capacity is. You don't know how long Dota is going to be here, what it is, and like I think it's okay to have fun on some games, even if they're slightly serious games. It's still okay, There's just a balancing act there, and like all things. And when you get it right, it feels really good. And when you get it wrong, it feels really bad. And so that's just something else to work on and try and nail.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of the many things that will continue to be worked on as the game continues, and also as esports scene continues, a never ending process. You could say the same thing for many other things, including the subjects that we talked about in this conversation so far. Um, looking at your time this year in particular, SVG. So far this year, on top of just covering the the three majors in addition to the two Dream League seasons and also Riyadh, you've done the majority on Southeast Asia in Division One in all three tours for this year. You can correct me if
Mhm.
I'm wrong if you've done anything else besides that, looking at DPC and group stage and stuff like that. But still, as someone who has normally covered North American and Western Europe and other regions, what was that like? What was that change like going from that to just focusing on one region in Southeast Asia for this year?
Southeast Asia DPC is definitely different than like the Europe or NA one. It is something very unfamiliar to me at the start in terms of like I know the players and teams, but it's unfamiliar in terms of like what does their regional gameplay look like because I hadn't followed it as in depth as when you sit there and watch it every day for like 3 weeks, 3 times a year. So it was pretty cool. I actually really enjoy SEA DVC. I think it's one of the more fun ones to watch. I mean, I say that it's very chaotic. It reminds me of NA Dota in a lot of ways, like a lot of throws, you know. They're the longest games by far. They always go very long. There's a lot of bad Dota played, as well as a lot of cool Dota, a lot of innovative things, a lot of weird things, a lot of creative things, a lot of just wacky team fights that are like, what is going on? It's just an illogical region um, that can birth some of the greatest teams we've seen, going back to like Orange Esports, right? It can also birth some of the most disappointing seasons in Dota in terms of like, goddamn, we have so much player talent here, and we just can't put C teams together that do anything. Like, how many Fnatic rosters have just busted at a LAN? And so it's like it's a very polarizing region, and it's a very disappointing region sometimes, a very Cinderella region sometimes. It's just got everything, and it makes it cool. And the player skill is very high. Like that's undeniable. No matter what you say about SEA teams, the individual players are extremely skilled. There's a reason they get poached a lot, right? We've seen Abed go to NA. We've seen Armel and FBZ go to Secret this year. We've seen a lot of C players go to other regions, and so that says a lot about the strengths and weaknesses of SEA as a whole. The players individually are very strong. The teams sometimes lack leadership, cohesion, and vision, um, and sometimes trust in that leadership. So it's rare you get a team that has all of it. I think Talon might be the greatest C team of all time, to be honest. I mean, I know that's a controversial statement because we do have like Orange and Tong Fu and some of these great teams with Mushi, and I think those definitely stand up there. But if you look at the state of competitive Dota now and what they've done this year with like putting everything together out of the region with a top three major finish, a top three at Riyadh, they've had a really good year, right? Um, and so I think that says something about how much that team has honestly done this year that sometimes gets overlooked, coming from a region that historically has not had a team go consistently deep in lands over the course of a year, really. They tend to be flash in the pan, like a Mineski wins a major, and then where do they go, right? So it's a very interesting region to watch. I've enjoyed a lot of fun games. Like I would honestly rather do CDPC than almost anything else outside of maybe like Western Europe because Western Europe is very hype. But even then, I think it's the most fun to watch. I genuinely think it is the most fun Dota. Like if you just want to sit down and be entertained by a series and some storylines, there's so much like inner player beef and like drama. There's so many inner team dramas. It's just so entertaining. Like half the players all hate each other, and then the next season they're all in a team with each other. It's just ridiculous. So, and then the players are high skill, so the actual like Dota mechanics are there. It just creates a very wacky interface that I honestly had a lot of fun with. So I have nothing but enjoyable praise. Would love to cast that region more. I wish it were closer to where I live. That's the only downside. The logistics of going to like Malaysia and stuff are very taxing over the course of a year. But otherwise, yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. They're great. The production and everything was really good for it this year, so I had a lot of fun.
So you actually went to Malaysia to do the events there, or do you had to work remote?
We went the first season, and then we did remote the second two because the schedule was just too much this year. Like the flights from West Coast US to Malaysia are like the worst in the world. It's like literally I think the worst route. You know, it's like 30, 35 hours they're just absolutely brutal. And I think casters remote, like you lose some quality, but it's not as big a drop off as like remote panel to an in-person panel, for example, or the whole show being there. So they were okay with it. Um, I don't think I don't think it diminished the quality of the show by any like huge noticeable degree, and it saves us a lot of mental and physical health, which like ePulse was producing CDBC. We worked with them a lot this year. They were also working on Lima Major and Bali Major, right? And so we were also working those events with them. So part of that was like, we're trying to save our uh, mental and physical tax and going there like 4 more flights and all that travel and save it for the other 2 majors that you guys are producing as well. That was part of my consideration. Like I want to be 100% for the majors as opposed to destroying myself flying this much, right? So doing those second 2 seasons remote helped that a lot, and that was part of the consideration there.
I talked to Sophie uh following the first tour of the CDPC, and listening to you talk about your experience in going through those long flights from America to Malaysia has me thinking about your time in Malaysia during the first tour of the DPC season. I want to know what was the day to day like for you. You know, how did you accommodate it, or how did you live in a new country? You know, working that kind of job. You know, what was that experience like for you?
It was great. I mean, I've been to Kuala Lumpur a couple times before then. It's a very relaxed city. Everything's very cheap. It's very easy to get around. Um, there's a lot to do, a lot of great food. It's a very easy city to live in, basically, especially as a foreigner, because your money goes a very long way, right? But ePulse were very good. Like the studio, I think they did a good job with production for the CDPC. The talent treatment was all top tier. Um, there's a lot of break days too, because it's only one region over 3 weeks. So the way the scheduling works out, there's like a decent amount of downtime, which I actually don't like. I rather work more, but some people like the downtime. So it was not very stressful in that sense. I had a great time. I wouldn't have mind living in Malaysia for that long in the year. It's just the getting there and going back that is like it's a lot of stress to fly that much, right? Because you're also flying to all this other stuff. So it just adds up. So you can save it anywhere, it's very nice. But I didn't have any issues with like the being in Malaysia or any of that outside of the humidity, which is pretty bad. But when we were there it was like it was raining a bunch and stuff, so it wasn't actually that bad either. Yeah, I had fun there. All the people who worked that event and stuff are all very passionate about the event and about Dota. They're all great guys. Like the other C talent they bring in are super nice people. Like Ninja Boogie, Adam, all those guys. They're super chill, super cool. Sophie, I think this was her first year doing like host work and stuff. She got better really fast. Um, so yeah, I wish I could have gone there more. It's just way too hard a trip. It's very hard. So, but it was very enjoyable. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you say that you prefer working all the time and in a year in the DPC, and so far, you know, looking at your trajectory, you've been able to do exactly that, covering various events that mentioned previously or earlier on in the conversation. Um, in parallel to that, we've seen a different change of the format when it comes to the DPC and also the general season uh, of events being run. You know, besides DPC and then majors and TI, you get third party orgs and, you know, third party tournaments and stuff like that. And then this year we've seen uh, Dream League, Riyadh slash Gamers 8, and on top of that with the DPC regions and stuff like that, TI.
Mhm.
Um, how have you viewed the change from last year to this year in terms of the scheduling, and also in line with that, do you feel like there's been plenty of Dota to watch for you and fans, or do you feel like there's been too little? You know,
I think it's been pretty good. I honestly don't. remember too much of what last year exactly looked like outside of, I feel like it was pretty similar with maybe slightly less events or slightly less huge ones. But I think it was similar in terms of like there was some dream leagues in between the DPC stuff. And I worked some of it, but I definitely did not work all of it. This year, me and Cap definitely worked pretty much everything, which is very nice. Very grateful for as well that people feel like we're good enough to do that and not get burnt out, because that's also a risk. Like, we're probably going to work more stuff this year, and at a certain point, I often wonder if people are like sick of hearing us. Like it almost gets too much. And obviously, we want to work everything we can because I mean, it's our job. We enjoy it. Like I genuinely enjoy casting all the games I cast. I love to cast games. I love to go to all these events. And I also am trying to make as much as I can. It's also just a part of it, right? Like you're trying to maximize what you can make out of esports while it's here, because again, like who knows, right? Like is the Dota esports scene going to exist in its capacity in 3 years from now? Is this going to even be a viable job? I don't know. So I have to also maximize what I can make out of the skill set I have now while it's still applicable. So that's a consideration. Um, but honestly, even if that weren't the case, I would still be doing what I'm doing, and I really enjoy it. And I just want to go to every event. If I don't go to a major, I feel like I missed the major, and it's like I feel sad. It's like damn, I could be there casting the major or working to some degree. So this year we got to do almost everything, and that was absolutely amazing. And I feel like it was a pretty good balance. I think there was almost constantly something going on that involved tier one teams. Um, there was like a decent variety. We had teams pop up almost at every portion of the year that like people didn't expect. That like at the start of the year, you go back to season one, it was like China's absolutely dead. And then all of a sudden, by the end of the year, we have like LGD and Aster who are breaking top six and starting to find some form. You had 3 of the top 8 at Bali were Chinese teams that maybe they didn't claim first or second, but that's a pretty far way to come from the start of the year where like they had a lot of the controversy and the teams just all blew up, right? You had Talon surprise people a lot this year. You had like Quest Esports come out of nowhere in like the last season and get a top 4 at Bali, only to get shoved out by their European brothers, right? Like you have these teams just come out of nowhere and they're just so good. There's so many good players now. The CIS teams, right? Like is BetBoom going to continue to choke on land, and then they go deep at some of these lands, still run into some of their old troubles, but are starting to look like a dominating force, right? One of the only teams that took on Gaimin and had like a winning map record versus them. You have Gaimin win all 3 majors, never been done before. Like it's a really cool year for Dota. And so I think when you look at it in that perspective, like I genuinely don't really have many complaints. We had Premier Lands, we had Premier DPC, we had a Riyadh Masters as a second TI, we have ESL doing their stuff, we had chill events like Dream League providing an alternative type of tournament as opposed to just like the super high pressure ones, right? That I think are really, really fun to watch. I think we'll see what TI does this year, but it's going back to Seattle. I think that's going to be pretty cool, regardless of where the prize pool or any of this other controversial stuff is at. Like being in Key Arena is going to be pretty awesome because every time I've been in there for TI, it has been one of the coolest experiences ever. So if that caps it off, I mean, yeah, it'll be a really cool year. Maybe one of the better ones overall that I can remember. Not too little, not too much, and a lot of hype games. So can't really complain.
And I'm gonna throw you a pretty difficult question now. Then, considering the highlights that you've had this year and also past years, looking at this year in particular, what's your favorite? What was your favorite match to cast and why?
Mm. This year, I'm gonna have to mentally go through a bunch of tournaments here.
Well, I have a list of the notable matches, so I could just list them out to you right now. So,
Uh,
you've done the Lima Major Grand Finals. You've done the Grand Finals for Dream League Season 20. You did the Bali Major lower and upper bracket finals, and you did the Grand Finals for Riyadh Masters, just like some time ago. So, plenty of good candidates, and also within C, that's also to be
yeah,
considered.
I think. We actually got to do some grand finals this year, which was very cool. It is something I wanted to do as a caster. It was like one of the goals I had. Because I think it's a unique experience, and you get to treat the games like as seriously as possible, which is pretty cool. Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of our grand finals were kind of not underwhelming, but they were more one-sided than you like dream for, I guess is how I'll put it, right? Which didn't make them bad series. I enjoyed them. The problem with the Lima one was that was the one where like you had Boxy had to go home, and I think it just upset like the whole storyline of Liquid being his favorites, unbeatable, and then gaming upset them. Obviously, gaming looking back might have. I mean, who knows what happens in that grand final? But that grand final was very one-sided, right? It was basically just stomps, and so that was just like a very unfortunate circumstance. I think the Riyadh Masters Grand Final was a pretty cool final. I don't think it had like it wasn't like a TI-10 Spirit LGD going to Game 5 like super close type thing. I think Spirit mainly had control of that series after Game 1. But I think it had some very cool games and it showcased some very cool Dota, especially Yatoro. Like watching Yatoro play in that Grand Finals was, I think, very, very I don't know. It's just like I say that guy is like watching him play is like art or something. Like the way he just moves around the map and understands the game in grand finals in the highest pressure tournament of the year. It's just so fluid. Is just very cool to watch. I think people take it for granted how easy he makes it look. Like I can tell you that shit is not easy. And he just makes it look easy. I think that's very cool for me to watch. Like I really enjoyed that series from a Dota gameplay analytics standpoint, even if the games weren't necessarily like these nail biting throne race games, right? I think they were very cool in their own way. Um, I think the game that stood out for me most this year, it was some game. Actually, there's two. There's two I remember. One is one of the games that there's one of the games at Bali that had like the hour-long pause in the middle, and then went like 80 minutes. And
Okay, okay.
I cannot remember like the exact teams because
Uh,
I just watched so many games.
was it playoffs? I think it was in playoffs, right?
It
Or
might have been, yes. That game had two very long matches. One of them was like the Quest Gaming one that went like the 3 hour game or whatever, right? But we also had one that had like an 80-minute pause in the middle and also went super long. And I don't remember who it was. It might have been gaming with somebody else too, and I think it was, but damn if I wish I could remember. All I know is that game was incredibly fun to cast. Because it went super long, it got super chaotic, and then it had an 80-minute pause that we filled the bunch for that was very fun because I like filling and talking about random stuff. And I think the viewers had a very fun time with that. And I consider that like a good cast because I think that's a game that easily could have been a very bad cast, right? Like you have a huge pause in the middle that kills a lot of momentum. You have to fill for a decent chunk of it and keep people entertained. And then the game also ended up going super long, and there was not a lot of action for like 40 minutes of it. So you have to maintain the hype while keeping people interested. And I think we did a really nice job with that cast, and that's one that I am personally like proud of. That showed our growth, I think, a lot. That maybe went under the radar because it was like a random Bali game, but that one stands out to me. And there was another C game from one of the DPCs. That might have been the first. It was the first season CDPC game that went like 70 minutes that I remember because we joked about uh, the book. What is it? The the tier 5 neutral item. It's like the Necro book, right?
yeah.
Uh, I joked about it being the book of the trash because I hate that item. And it ended up being in a situation where they pulled the book back and it ended up like doing some work in the game. It ended up being really good. And I just remember laughing my ass off in the game because I'd called it book of the trash, and then we were like, "You get the book out of the trash, get it out of there, like bring it back. We need it." It was just such a clowny game. I had so much fun that game. It was like one of the most fun games I've casted in so long. It was I cannot remember the exact teams, but I remember it was CDPC season 1 with the Book of the Dead at like 70 minutes.
I think I'm looking up the Bali major, and I feel like it might have been the first example that you gave up. I think it might have been the Bet Boom Tundra one because I think that's the only one that lasted like well beyond an hour.
Sounds familiar, yeah. That might have been one of those. It might have been that game.
Yeah, because like it's the only one that's been.
Yeah, I think it was probably that game. I
It's
think it was the game that got super stalled out and it had the mega pause in between. And
Yeah, I think that was before the ruling was made about the team bet boom and then
yes,
going down to the lower. It might have been that one, and then you
yeah,
also
that,
cast.
yeah,
Yeah, it must have been that one. And then for C, I'll just leave it up to the viewers to find that specific match.
yeah, they'll
Uh,
find it.
all right then. Follow up to that. Overall, what's your favorite? What's your
Favorite
favorite
what
match to cast? Sorry about that.
of all time?
For you, for you, for you, your favorite match that you casted overall, not just this year, but like throughout.
Huh. I don't know. I'd say it's probably either one of those two or the or like the game three of the Liquid TA series that I talked about from TI 11. I think that game three was just that game was just way too hype. That's like the craziest game I've been in. I think uh, that just made it fun in that way. But I think those three that I named were all fun in their own way for me. Are really enjoyable.
Hmm. And for sure, we'll be definitely looking for more interesting and thought provoking and also exciting cast for from you in particular, and also your partner Cap. Um, I want to ask more down to your experience in relation to your past pro days, and of course you've played as a player. You were a player for the better part of a decade up until like 2021, 2019, 2021, in
Mm.
which you then moved over to the the casting side of the game. And so when it comes to looking back at your time as a player, what did you feel like was what did you feel like was the biggest um attribute that evolved the most for you in particular, from the start up until the time you decided to hang up the mouse as a player?
I mean, I think I definitely improved mechanically as a player a lot. Uh, My skill went up generally over time. Uh, but I think leadership wise, I definitely improved a lot. Um, I don't really think I was that. I don't really think I was a captain at all. Like the first years I started captaining, because I kind of just got thrown into it, and there wasn't anybody else, and I was just trying to do my best. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I think by the end, I kind of knew what I was supposed to do, and I was like starting to try and learn. Like I was starting to understand how to do it, but I never really got there 100% anyway. But I still feel like I did a better job. I think at the last TI we played, which was TI 10, our results at that tournament were pretty bad. It was like another ninth to 12th. Um, I think, but when everybody talks about that tournament, I think if you ask anybody on that team, we did not play well at that tournament. I think individually we all didn't play well either. It was some sort of funk. We were off the meta. I don't know what it was. I actually don't think our drafts were that bad in a lot of the games either, but we just weren't playing well. I think it happens. It wasn't like a choke or anything. It wasn't people were pressured. It just from the start of that tournament onwards, something went wrong for us and it just never clicked. But I think we were actually a pretty strong team in the team sense, like which is not something you see because you don't see it in the results and it's not really going to show in the game quality. But I think we actually came together. Like despite the fact we had such a bad win rate at that tournament, we were losing almost every game. It was an absolute disaster. We still came together as a team, and that's one of the things I take some pride in. Is like we didn't just crumble, we didn't bow out, we didn't choke out. Um, People didn't turn on each other. People didn't lose hope. They didn't lose trust in each other. Like that actually got maintained, and I think that's like the most you can do. Because sometimes you go on an event and you just suck. You're off the meta. Maybe you just weren't good enough in the first place. Like we weren't the best players in the world, you know. Um, but I think we could have done a lot better than we did. But it's not like we went in there thinking we were gonna win the whole tournament. But we actually had like that mindset sometimes, you know. And I think that showed some of the progress that I made as a captain and the progress that everybody on that team made as players. Um, all together over like those 3 or 4 years. That again, it's not going to be reflecting the results. People can just say, "Oh, well, you guys sucked and you sucked." Yeah, sure, but like, I think it's something that you can take away, and I think a lot of Dota players have that type of stuff, which goes on behind the scenes. That at least you can hold your head high. That's a TI where even despite the bad result, I will hold my head high and say, given how bad we were playing, I think it came together in a weird way. Whereas other events, like we played bad and sucked and it crumbled, and that feels terrible when that happens because it feels like you wasted your time. So I think that was an improvement, but still a sad outcome. But at least it didn't feel as bad, uh, if that makes sense.
No, it certainly does. And, looking at Quincy Crew, looking at Quincy Crew's time of existence throughout 2020 and 2021, and a little bit of 2020, or a little bit of 2019, it was a team that obviously stood out as the number one team in North America, and it's one that I covered in particular. A few years ago, I talked to YawaR about the team's experience in TI-10, and I think I've talked to Jack also before TI-10, that event, and how he viewed the state of the team. And it's a team that I hold deep in my heart as a North American, and also as a North American Dota fan. Um, when it comes to looking at the team's trajectory within that time span, what do you feel like was the what do you think will be the one thing that people will remember out of Quincy Crew, and also your contribution to the team? How do you view that perception towards yourself and your time within that team?
I don't know. I actually don't really know. I mean, I guess people will remember that team, maybe just because they enjoyed watching it or they enjoyed like we were some NA underdogs that, we had like some okay performances. I think I think we had some points where we were actually fairly good, but we lacked a lot of the larger understanding of how to like do well on LAN, which I fault myself for. And I think it prevented us from out strategizing a lot of teams when it mattered. Um, because we like if you look at a lot of our LAN performances, we had a lot of 2-1s, for example. And I think when you have a lot of 2-1s over the course of your team's history, like over years, like every lane we go to, it's like 2-1 loss, 2-1 loss, 2-1 loss. It means you have the capability to win the series, but like you're missing components. And that's like a sad thing to look back on because it means if you had more experience or understanding, or maybe someone else who'd come in and can point like 2 or 3 things out you're doing wrong in terms of methodology, maybe you could have fixed some of those things. Maybe you couldn't have. You might have also just been terrible. I don't know. That's what some people will say. Like we just sucked. Probably some truth in that. But I think people on that team worked hard for a lot of it, and we were all pretty much on the same page and good dudes. And like people are still on very good terms with each other. Nobody from that team, when they meet each other to land, doesn't like give each other a hug and look back fondly on what we tried to do, which I think says something good about the character of those teams and what they got built. Um, which is something I prided myself on. I didn't want to make teams where people were just toxic to each other, and when they looked back, it was like, damn, that was just a shitty experience, and we were just trying to force something. Because that does exist for a lot of teams. Like you're just trying to win at any cost. And I didn't really want to do that, even if I know it maybe hurt chances a little bit. Um, and I believed in a lot of those players. Like I still do. I think they had a lot of potential and skill that got left on the table, which is maybe what I'm like the saddest about looking back. I wish I had more capability to fulfill that potential. Because I think if you look at Quinn now, right? Like he's like the best mid in the world, won 3 majors. Like you're telling me that within like 2 months he went from like a last place at TI, absolute dog player that no one took any respect for, and then he wins 3 majors. Like that happened in a month of going to Europe? No, right? That's years of work, and a lot of that was him. He is by far one of the hardest working players I've met. So I'm not trying to take it away from him. Um, but like you play on teams, and teams learn. You learn from each other, and you build stuff, and that potential existed because those teams believed in it. And I'm not saying all of us could have gotten to where Quinn got. I think Quinn was by far the hardest working of all of us, and maybe the most skilled. Um, but it's like I think our results ended up discounting our potential more than it should, and that just makes me sad. Nothing's guaranteed. I'm not saying we deserved more or anything, but like just looking back, it's like damn. wish we could have fulfilled more of it, because I think we did have a lot of fans who followed us and believed in like an NA team that was a true NA team. You know, we weren't importing a bunch of players. We all grew up playing NA forever, and we were all NA dudes, and it was it just didn't pan out. But like maybe that'll be some of the imprint. I don't think much more than that. Uh, but I think that's okay. Every team has their story. Ours wasn't the worst, wasn't the best. It's part of the history of Dota, so that's something.
Earlier in your answer, you mentioned about how the team lacked the component that prevented you guys from breaking through and reaching higher placements within international events. Um, but at this moment in time, now that you're 2 years in as a caster, do you feel like you figured out what that component is?
I feel like I understand what it is better, but that doesn't mean I would necessarily be able to. Like, if I went back in time with my skill set now, would I be able to translate it to that team? I don't know, right? I mean, that team was like particular. It's hard to say, but I understand more of what we were missing, I guess. And so I would at least know what we would be working towards. Where at the time I didn't really understand that we were missing those larger components, and it hurt us, I think. But this is like me looking back. It's hard to know. I just feel like I have a better overall sight of how like these metas and the macro ideas develop at lands, and how teams are thinking about their drafting and relative to other teams and how they're doing it. And that was lacking a little bit because we were so focused on just trying to get good and trying to make the team to function and get everybody up to like a high skill level, and laning in particular, that a lot of that fell by the wayside. And so that maybe it's not like I understand more something. It's just I would focus on different things, you know. And I think I recognize the importance of those things more than maybe we placed on them at the time. Maybe that's like a better way to look at it. I think that's definitely true. Like I would be I'm way more confident now if I were to go and coach a team, for example, and what direction I would bring as a coach and what I would try and do and what I would contribute, as opposed to where I was 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I don't think that's close, but I think that's also just a product of maturing and getting older and thinking about stuff that worked and didn't in the past, and just observing more Dota, observing more teams, talking to more people. Like I've gotten to talk to a lot more players and teams and captains and coaches over the last years than I did as a player, which sounds weird, but like you don't really talk to a lot of other teams when you're playing because I mean they don't want to talk to you. I think it's better nowadays than it used to be, but people are competitive. They're tribal, right? They don't want to share ideas. They don't want to talk about how they think about. But when you're a talent, you kind of get more of that. Like people are more willing to talk to you about how their team functions, how a player functions, how they think about a draft, how they think about small things in the game. Sometimes just stuff they think is broken. I've gotten to do that more, so that also like broadens your horizon. You start to think your ways of thinking about the game expand because you're not in like this think tank little bubble anymore where everybody thinks the same on your team and you're stuck in that and you can't get new ideas in that ecosystem. Suddenly you're in like the whole ecosystem that contains everybody's bubbles, and so you kind of branch out from there, and it makes you think about the game differently, which I think is really nice and often undervalued. I've actually told people that I think there's a reason certain players have become talent and then gone back to playing and done better when they gone back. Um, I can't sit here and say that it's 100% why, but I think taking that breather, stepping out of your little team bubble and like being exposed to different people, ideas, being humbled maybe, and like just thinking about the game differently, it just mentally helps you when you go back. If you do go back and you play again, I think you're just a better person and player. Maybe not mechanical skill, like maybe you have to get that back up, right? But assuming you can do that, I think in theory you become a better player in the end. Um, and I mean, I point to Seb as a great example, but I'm not going to pretend to know what led to Seb's success. Like, I hate naming him here as an example because I think that guy is just a beast, obviously, and he knows what got him there. I'm not going to pretend to know. But it wouldn't surprise me if he would say that part of being talent in some weird way helped him. That's how I'd phrase it, right? Like, if he told me that, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe it didn't at all, but I wouldn't surprise me if for some people it has.
It might have just it might go about creating a, I don't know what's that word, but paradox. You want to know how a certain guy does it, but you don't want to tell them, but then you might. It's only a matter until that person just actually discloses what it is that made his return
Hmm.
terrific. You made Seb as an example, as a type of person who's been able to, you know, dive into broadcast and talent stuff, and then go back to being a player, and then doing well and doing much better uh, uh, now than before in the past. And so, is there another example? Is there another player that caught your eye within that juncture that stood out to you?
Uh, not not to that degree, no. I mean, I also think not a lot of players have gone to the talent side and come back. Not a lot of players have gone to talent side in general, I guess. Um, but if we see it more in the future, it could be something that's interesting. Um, I just think he's a very particular case, right? Because he's a very unique person and a very unique player. Um, but no, sorry, I don't really have anybody else that comes to mind.
That's all good. Diving back into Quincy Crew for a little bit. Um, Looking back at the team and the lineup that made up of it, it consisted of largely of a core of yourself, MSS, YawaR, and then a little bit of Quinn. But certain other people came into the lineup over the years. From like going back to like um VGJ.Storm and then up until Quincy Crew. Certain
Hmm.
people come in, but then the core would largely stay the same, featuring yourself. And so um and it's also considering the fact that you guys were based in North America, at a region that has been heavily scrutinized, and is one that is seen that that is something that it's not really as respected and revered as other regions in the world. But still, what about this particular group of players? Yourself, MSS, you wore a little bit of Quinn. What made it possible for you guys to stick together for the many years that transpired?
Uh, I mean, lack of options, probably. To be honest, like, I think we all viewed each other as the best that we were going to get out of our region, and that was it. Like, we want to build the best team we can. It's either us or it's EG at the time, right? And EG at the time was not really pulling talent out of NA. They pretty much pulled Abed, and then after they pulled Abed, the roster was locked for like the entirety of when we were playing, outside of they were changing their offlaner. And they would never pull that offlaner from NA. And we were also changing our offlaner a lot. So it was pretty much like, well, we can either play with each other or like, who are you going to go play with, right? And some of the guys did get offers at various times, especially early on, for some very good teams that I won't name out of respect to them and their history. But there were points where some of those players got very good offers, um, and they declined them. So that's something about them also having faith in that team in terms of the people and working hard and improving, which I think was the core aspect. Like everybody on that team at a certain point was very humble and willing to work on a lot of stuff and talk through things and continue to grow and grind and play a lot of games. And that is what got us to a pretty good degree initially. And some of that fell off over time. It varies as people lose motivation or whatever, and it hurt us. But at the time, I think that was like the biggest factor. And it's like, hey, we have a team that's functioning. We have a pretty good fundamental base in terms of we have decent orgs we're working with, decent support. People are pretty good natured. Everyone's friends with each other. They're willing to work hard. They're willing to be humble. They're willing to listen to each other. It's not often you get a good environment like that, right? And so you have to have a pretty damn good offer to be willing to trade that off. Um, and it just didn't really exist for a lot of people. Now, I think there are some offers that people, if you talk to them, will be like, yeah, I probably should have taken that. It was some high profile names, a high profile team. But you never know. Like, you go to that team, it doesn't work in a month, you get kicked for somebody else, and then you threw away something with solid potential for something with maybe higher potential, but it's riskier. They're very hard calls to make. Um, I remember discussing them with some of the players too. We were pretty open about it, and I would be objective with them. Like, yeah, this is a better team on paper, but it's a riskier team as well. And I obviously believe in us. I believe in what we're doing, but it's like your decision. Um, those just aren't easy to make. But I think a lot of it is just like, if you want to play an NA and you want to be on an NA team that goes to LAN, who are you doing it with? There's 2 slots. One of them is EG slash current Shopify. The other is, I'm gonna tell them it's my team, right? Like, I as a captain, it's gonna be me. So you can play with me and go to LAN, or you can not play with me, and I'm gonna not let you go to LAN. Like, that's basically my sell at the end of the day, or what people understand. So that's the power of the squad. That's why I think that core stood together, because we went to every LAN pretty much. Like, we qualified for pretty much everything. Um, it's just we weren't able to reach that potential on LAN. Now the VGJ we actually did pretty well. That was a team where we did fine on LAN. We won a minor. We got second place at Changsha Major or Changchu, I think. Only losing to LGD. We topped our group at TI. We got top 8 at TI, which wasn't great. I think we underperformed at that tournament, but it's still an okay showing for like the first TI a lot of us were playing at. um, if you look at those results together in a pretty short span, not too bad. That team was like pretty good on LAN. That team didn't necessarily have LAN problems. We were just very inexperienced, but we had very good players in hindsight, because that version had snaking, and snaking was very pivotal to that team. But I didn't really understand the ways in which he was at the time, and so again, just lack of experience, lack of understanding of people, of players, of relationships, and ended up hurting us over the long run, because he was very valuable, and I knew it initially, but I guess it ended up working out for him in the end. He won TI 11. Now he's
Yeah,
doing great.
it's another player, that has shown to have
Yes.
success, outside of his days in North America. And, it's a very commendable thing to see. And also one that instills, or not really instills, but spawns pride, as someone that has been in North America, covering North America and in the US, well, representing the region and doing your trade on your side. And you mentioned VGJ.Storm, first TI, even so, despite not managing to win the event and putting off a high placement, you did reach top 8, and that's a commendable achievement for someone to have done that in their first appearance in that event. And so, in relation to the subsequent TI appearances that you'd have in Quincy Crew and TI 10, you know, how did you view that experience, in TI 8 in BGJ.Storm, and the manner in which the team composed itself throughout the entire event?
I think our team composition was okay. I just think is very inexperienced players. These are like, that TIA was basically first TI for a lot of us. No one had even played on a main stage. No one had played on a booth, let alone on LAN much, outside of maybe MSS at the time. I don't even really remember. Um, that it's like, I don't know. It's tough when you do, like, and I'm the captain, and I've never done this shit. What do people want from us? If you have like a puppy on there or something, I think it can look vastly different, right? Because then you have this guy who's been there 6 or 7 times, who's been to 100 lands, who understands what can go right or what can go wrong for a team on land, can understand how players are behaving and why. He understands a lot more of the larger macro stuff I'm talking about. I've been doing that for like 3 or 4 months, and on my first team I'd ever built, on the first team I'd ever captained, and we'd had a lot of decent success in a short time, but like, we don't really know. I don't know why we're succeeding as much as we are, right? We're just kind of winning, and I like to believe it's because we have like good ideas, and our composition of the team is good, and we have some really good players like Resolution, who was like one of the best carries in the world at the time. All of this helps, but I don't really know, right? And we just go into TI, and the second we encounter like 1 or 2 problems, it's very hard to adjust or fix them, because I don't know what the fuck is going on, like, to be honest. And like, there's just no way I can know, because I don't have the experience as a captain at that point. And we didn't really have another player who did outside of maybe Rezo. And I think Rezo like did his part. Like, he's a pretty experienced TI player, but it's not his job, right? Like I wouldn't put it on him. I wouldn't. It's unfair to, especially given the position at the time. We also just had maybe some bad luck running into OG. Like I don't know. I mean, what can you do? You can say it's bad luck. You can also say, well, that could have also been us, right? We could have beaten them and maybe gone on. So uh, all those things go both ways. But I just think, yeah, if I was a captain who had been captaining for 4 or 5 years at that point, maybe we get one or two placements higher, and suddenly that team looks a lot better. And I understand the strength of my players, and everything looks different. But that's life. Like you don't know what you don't understand until you go into a situation like TI where it exposes what you don't understand, and then you go, damn, I don't know a lot, you know. And then how do you learn that? Well, you got to do it a bunch more, and you don't necessarily get those opportunities a lot. That's why the super experienced captains have historically been very valuable, or players that have like an instinctual understanding of the game. That's the alternative. It's just someone who's extremely innately confident, who instinctually understands the game, and is just going to go in that game and make shot calls, and then out of game reset the team and do these things, and they're just going to do it, and they're just a natural. And those guys, yeah, they're championship caliber players. I look at people like Seb. I look at people uh, like I think Toronto Tokyo actually has that probably. You look at that guy just goes in games. He makes calls. He makes calls in draft. I don't know. Like the guy just a innate, super cocky, confident shot caller, whatever you want to say. Like you can do that too, right? Or you have these people like Puppy or Kuro that can consistently lead a team pretty deep at TI. There's a reason. They can just fix a lot of stuff very fast, and that is a trait of adaptability that is invaluable at the big tournaments.
Sticking in within TI 8, in addition to the fact that it was your first foray into that type of event with the bright lights and all of that considered, it's also in the home region in Vancouver in Canada, although you're not Canadian, obviously. But still, it must have uh felt pressure. You must have felt a lot of pressure on top of the issues that the team was undergoing. Going in from playoffs, not going in from group stage up until playoffs. Did you feel it? So that said, did you feel any sort of pressure? When it came to representing the region, or was it just you were too occupied in trying to solve the issues within the team that you didn't really have time for things like that?
No, I didn't feel any pressure. I don't think people did. Maybe they did. I can't speak for them. I didn't. Generally, I haven't felt pressure at lands outside of when the team is putting pressure on themselves. That's the only pressure I've felt at land. At that tournament, that did exist. There were games in that booth where the team was like starting to turn on each other, and it became very stressful very quickly. Um, and probably is what led to us playing worse and worse as the series went on, which is the opposite of what you want to have happen. Again, you need a strong captain to correct that. Not what I was at the time. Um, and you need like a more level-headed team. Not what we were at the time. And so that really built up very fast in the booth. People really felt it, and it became a very toxic atmosphere in some ways very quickly. That pressure I felt, but in terms of like, wow, this game is going really bad communication wise really fast. If it's going good, it's okay, but the second something starts going bad, it goes pretty bad. But outside of that, no, like there wasn't too much pressure on us. We were just there playing. Like I don't know, we were just some kids from North America. What can go wrong? Nobody expects anything from us anyway.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to note that that team in particular started out early on in the year as Team IDC with a few of the core members intact, yourself included, and also MSS. I think a little bit of snaking as well, but then other members were then slotted into the team as the year progressed. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Um, and of course, as you said, it was a team that had plenty of success from you guys getting signed into the team with VGJ.Storm, um, Changsha, always an example, and then y'all won that minor in Thailand, and then also qualifying through open qualifiers within North America, and talking about the range of success. Did you even mention that um about how the team was able to make it possible that success and become one of the most respected teams in North America at that year. And so, going more into depth with that in that trait, were you surprised yourself as to how quickly and how much the team improved to the level that they reached by the time TI 8 rolled around? And also, in addition to that, what made it possible? It's simply put, what made it possible? Was there one main factor that got the ball rolling for you guys?
I think people were very skilled at the time. I think that was when YawaR and Mojo were grinding a lot. They were playing a lot, and they were very good. They were very high ranked. And we brought in Resolution, and he was extremely high skilled at the time too. And we like switched roles a little bit, and it just worked naturally. And it was something based on an idea that I brought. I don't know if I brought, but it was based on an idea that we had on EG as well that ended up being the same that worked for Matumba Man on Liquid. That is like we pushed YawaR into the sacrificial 1-2 role, where basically you give Resolution the true one priority, and YawaR would just go around and fight like a fighting carry style. And it's something that worked out pretty well for us. It gave our team some structure. Our drafts were like super easy because we knew exactly what we wanted. We had like really strong early flex picks. There's just a lot that was in our favor at the time, even if we didn't understand why. And people were high skill. So like if we set ourselves up well in the draft, even if we didn't know we were doing that, people generally played pretty well. Like we fought team fights well. We have one of the best carries in the world who is going to be really farmed and probably win a lot of late games. That's generally a decent recipe to do, pretty reasonably well. I think snaking at the time was also one of the strongest shot callers I had encountered, and I still think it's probably true. Um, but in NA at the time, when I was like looking at players, nobody I looked at was a shot caller in NA. Absolutely nobody. He was the only player I encountered that like I played some pubs with him. I played some games, and this guy was just yelling everything the whole game. Just go here, do this, buy this item, let's take this. And I was like, oh my god, he's an absolute beast. Like it's a shot caller from North America. Holy crap. So like that's why I had faith in him. Because at the time his reputation was very bad. His reputation was basically he was a very toxic teammate. He had not had a lot of success. Everybody wrote him off. In fact, he was having trouble even getting on any teams at the time. And I was like, no, fuck it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen, right? He doesn't seem too toxic to me. When I talked to him, he seemed pretty chill. And he ended up causing some issues on the team. I think Snaking would say that too. He's matured a lot over the years. I think the player he is now is like 10x the player he was. Not that he didn't have that potential, but just how far he's come as a person and teammate has come a tremendously a long way. But he always had the innate understanding of Dota and the skill and the shot calling. And the shot calling is what makes snaking. Like there's a reason he won TI as a 5 captain, right? Does not surprise me because that's what he brought to our team too. And that's just invaluable to have in a core player when he was playing offlane at the time. And he's also a player that drove a lot of combative discussion. But combative discussion makes your team better. It makes you think about things. It makes you come to conclusions. It makes you all on the same page. And that was a pretty valuable trait at the time. These are things I didn't really understand about him until later. That looking back, I understand more now. That made him very valuable to that team. So we just had a lot of very strong components going together at the same time for us that we didn't really understand, but meshed really well, right? We have a strong shot caller on the off lane who's controlling the flow of the game. Really good itemization. Is a driving force in the team in terms of discussions and pushing us towards good things. We have YawaR who's sacrificing a lot and willing to play a wide variety of heroes in a flexible role and have 5 or 6 deaths like a Matumba, but doesn't matter. You have Resolution who's going to like carry the game in the end and gets pick priority, he gets farm priority, he gets everything he needs to be successful. And then we have 2 supports who work well together, have some decent experience, and I think MSS was one of the better forward playmakers at the time. So like, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that we did well. I think we've caught a lot of teams off guard at how well we actually played, but ultimately it didn't work out as well as we'd hoped. But I think that's just due to inexperience. I think we actually had a decent amount of the pieces you want in a team to be successful, even by nowadays standards.
And for those of you who are not familiar with SVG's career before he formed that team when that will eventually become VGJ.Storm, he was a coach. over in EG for the better part of the 2017 season, and so to
Mhm.
go from that to then being a captain, trying to build a team, what was that transition like for from that time?
Very fast. It all happened within about 6 months. Um, so I was not really ready for it. Also, very different role. I think on the EG team, I was not a good coach because I was very inexperienced. That was like, I view that almost like they brought me in as like an internship in a way. Um, it was like, let's try this guy out and see what he can bring. But I was not like, oh, this guy is like a coach we need, right? It was like, let's just bring this guy in and see, because I had no resume at all. And I ended up probably learning more from them than they learned from me, which is why I call it almost an internship. Um, I did help. I do think I had an effect on the team. Like I think I helped a lot at the TI run we had and some of the period after that, but maybe like 10% of what a coach could do nowadays, you know? It was also a very early period for coaches in Dota in general. Like there wasn't really anybody to look at and be like, I'm gonna learn what this guy's doing as a coach and try and bring it. It was like me and like three other people. I don't even remember who the hell it was at the time. It's so it's like no one really knew what the role was doing. We weren't even allowed in the booth to draft. It was just a very difficult position. So I probably would have kicked me too, but it just put me in a position where it was like, I don't really know what the hell I'm doing. Let's try something, and it started to work. So it was like, okay, well, since it's starting to work, it means something's probably right. So you just go with it. Like I wish I had something more to say, but that's kind of just it. And then you just go with what's working.
Yeah, and also there was another stint in which you were helped out the coaching staff as well in 2016. In I think it was during TI 6, in which you helped the team during that time span. Might be wrong, might be right. I have to double check in the
TI 7,
future. TI 7, yes,
yes.
yeah, TI 7, not TI 6. And so uh you came into that role at a pretty young age, 23, 22, 26, not 20, not 26, but like 24, 23, 22, around that time. Um, you mentioned about how that transition was quick from coach to player. Did you even expect that you would even be put into that role?
No, I thought I would never play again. I actually remember after TI 7, we had a really disappointing result, and then they wanted to keep working with me, and I thought that was kind of the last chance I'd have to choose between playing or coaching, because I viewed it as like you had to kind of commit towards one, which was a pretty stupid idea at the time, but that's how I felt. Um, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to be a coach now. And then 6 months later, I got kicked. I was like, all right, well, time to be a player, I guess. And then I ended up being a better player than I thought I was going to be, because I also when I went back to playing, I played 5 instead of 4, which was way better for me, way better. So that also helped. Um, yeah,
What? Why do you think so? Why do you think the change in position fared well for you?
just more natural. Just suited. It just felt better to play. I think I talked enough that 5 was more justifiable than 4, which tends to just be more of a playmaking role than a shot calling role. I don't think like I don't think my peak playmaking was good enough to justify putting me on 4 for the farm priority. But at the same time, I think my spell casting is like quite good for a 5, so it ends up being nice. Um, the hero pool was better. It just felt more natural. Also about who I was playing with, like it was easy. Are almost no good 5s in NA historically, in terms of like captain 5s. So if I can fill that role, then it's more value because then we don't have to find that. Whereas finding a good 4 is a bit easier, and like MSS was there, and he was like by far the best 4 in NA. So it was like some necessity thing too, right? But it just fit better. I don't know. It's just one of those things like you just play it and you just know it's better for you. I remember talking after TI 7. I think that was the TI where Optic Gaming formed. PPD formed Optic Gaming, and there was a discussion we had where Peter wanted to play with me, um, but it ended up not happening. And then after I played 5, I remember Peter telling me something like, "Oh, it's a shame you're good at 5. It means we'll never play together," or something like that. Because like we're both 5s. Like he saw that basically I was a way better 5 than I was a 4, very quickly. So it's just one of those things. You just see it. I think eventually players find out what they're supposed to play. It's pretty rare that you like can transition your role and have it be equally as successful or more successful. It takes a lot of work, a lot of time, and most people aren't willing to like see through that rough period to get to the end. And generally, you have to have already like you have to have a really good skill set in there initially to be able to do it, either in the shot calling or the mechanical skill. So, like someone like Ace, Ace is he transitioned from carry to offlane, has been very successful. Took him a long time though, right? And it took him a long period where people maybe didn't have faith in him. Like nobody was gonna look at Ace as an offlaner for like the 2 years in there and be like, oh, this is a S tier offlaner. But now they do. Like that doesn't happen overnight. The guy put in a huge amount of work to get there. It's a very difficult process. There's not a lot of players who can do that and maintain that success. They generally either A have to be so mechanically gifted that they can almost play any role, which is like Sumail, right? You can throw Sumail in almost any role, he's going to be like an S tier player almost, except maybe his offlane, a little sus, but he won't like me for that one. But like his skill and playmaking is just so high, it almost doesn't matter, right? Or their shot calling is so good that it almost doesn't matter. And I think that's more of the category of like the YawaR or Sebs, or maybe even like Fear, or like the when Fear transitioned a bit, right? He had some success. Those guys, like they just add their contribution to the shot calling, and they're also very good. But like there's a reason they generally go between like 3, 4, and 5 more of the time, because those are generally the shot calling roles, and then they're just like they kind of form their contribution through that no matter what. It's pretty rare you get one of those on one of the carry roles, but it does happen. I'd point towards a player like Nightfall, I think is the greatest example. Nightfall is a player that is one of the most dominant shot callers we've seen emerge in Dota in the last few years. That guy talks nonstop the entire game, and he's a 1 player, right? And he tried to do it from 3 on the old EG for that period, and they were good, but they weren't S tier, right? And now I think he's realized I'm a natural 1 player more than a natural 3 player, and he's gone back to that, and he's found his success again. So I think there's just some natural ability to it, and also it's very dependent on what the innate player skill set is in order to help them get there. It makes the process easier. Doesn't limit them, but it makes it easier for sure.
Yeah, and taking the focus onto your positions, position 4, position 5, and comparing that with the players of today, I want to ask out of curiosity, um, what has been the biggest difference that you've seen within those particular roles, between your playing days and right now? What has been the difference between both eras, if I might say so?
I think the 3 and 4s are a lot better communicators than they were back when I played. Like the communication on teams, if you look at most 3s, they're one of the largest communicators. Was not always the case. And the 4s have also picked it up, whereas a lot of times you just had a mute 4. Not a lot of 4s are mute anymore. In fact, some of the best 4s in the world are strongest communicators on a team. Like I look at Boxy for Liquid, right? He's like their driving communicator on that squad, and they have like Nisha, who doesn't talk a lot from a core role. These things vary, but I think 3 and 4 definitely talk a lot more now than they used to back in the day, where it was like a lot on the 5. And I think the 5 is a lot more skilled nowadays than he used to be. I think if you go back 4 or 5 years, a lot of the 5s were just absolute trash. Like they were terrible. They were just bad players, like mechanical skill wise. What they were doing in the game wasn't necessarily a fault of them. It was also part of how Dota was balanced at the time. If you remember and go back, like the 5 had a lot less capability in those games. They were a lot more gimped. You were like a brown boots and a walking ward, right? So there's only so much you can do, and there's only so much you can learn if that's how you're playing pubs. If all your pubs are a brown boots ward, I mean, how good are you really going to be? You don't have these talents to fall back on. You don't have shards. You don't have all these like low net worth items that can boost up your skill set and have a large impact in the fights. So I'm not faulting the 5 players back then. I'm just saying if you look at the actual game impact, like it was a way simpler role to play, and there's a lot less going on. Nowadays, the 5 is like comparable to a 4. In some games, you have these like enchantresses that are straight up carrying the game in damage. So you have to be a way better player and capable of a lot different styles. You can carry from 5. You can carry team fights from 5. You can carry the pickoffs from 5. Like you can do a lot in game from this role now, and that means if you have a 5 player with a higher skill ceiling, more versatility, more adaptability, you can fulfill all that. Your team's just better. Your team is just straight better, right? And the other thing is you have this coach who can do a lot more drafting, which can take some of the pressure off that five as well. Which traditionally all the fives did the drafting in Dota. Nowadays it's a bit more mixed, but even still, having another guy who can take that role off of a player means that player's skill ceiling in game goes up because it's something he has to worry about less or think about less, which means he can devote more time and more presence of mind to the other stuff. So you have these guys that are like super high rank fives now, which was kind of unheard of back in the day. It would have been laughed at actually, but you have these like, Soxa, he played 4 and 5, but Soxa's been rank 1 with too many Smurfs to count. Like you have players like Celery, who's extremely high rank and extremely high skilled, right? Um, uh, Insania has come a long way. Like these European fives are just damn good players, right? And a lot of the other regions too. I look at Talon's success, for example. I've always talked about how good their supports have been this entire year, especially Ollie. Like the fact that Talon were able to bring Ollie in from him having success on IG in China, where they won a major, right? It's not a coincidence. That guy's a really good five. Like these are just really high skill fives. If you look at how these guys play, Y from LGD, that guy's tremendously good. Now, of course, he won a TI, so that helps. But like, I'm just saying, you go and watch the replay. What these guys are doing compared to 4 or 5 years ago is night and day. Um, and so I think that's one of the biggest differences. Because I think back then I considered myself a five who focused more on the gameplay and skill rather than the other stuff. That was like what I was supposed to be bringing to a team, which probably hurt us, but it was like what I was doing at the time. But nowadays, I think that's just part of the job. Like your five has to just be a good player. If your five is not a good player, you're just playing the game 4v5 and you're probably gonna lose because the five's impact in game is it's not like 20, right? But if it's like a 15 or 16% of the game is your five, that's a huge chunk, right? When you're playing games for 1% differences. So those are probably the largest differences I've seen. I think 1 and 2 have remained pretty similar over the years. They've also grown in complexity and skill. Obviously, every role is better than it used to be. Um, but I think their purpose is fairly similar, and we're still seeing a lot of the 1s and 2s that were really good back in the day, like Sumail, still be really good, right? Like the game's changed. He's had his ups and downs, but the guy is still a monster of a player. And it's the same with like Somnus out of China or a lot of these European 1s and 2s. Like you look at Matumba Man. I mean, how many teams has Matumba Man led to championships, right? Like that speaks to the consistency and strength of these guys, but also the fact that their understanding of the game has gone so far over so many metas, which is impressive and says a lot about them.
And it's good. It's very interesting that you highlighted the effectiveness of not just of being a player that is good mechanically speaking, but also one that is a good communicator. And from how you described it, communication is taking a much bigger role and much bigger emphasis nowadays compared to back then. Now you can't just play the game well and just expect for everybody else to 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 work in kind to the in a fashion in which a team can win the game, win the tournament, win the series, win a succession of tournaments. A string, a manufacture a string of success to the
Mhm.
level of various past legendary teams. And so, speaking in terms of communication, who do you think is the best communicator in the pro game, and why?
Right now, you mean, or like in the last year?
Right now.
It's a very tough question because obviously we're not in the room with these teams, right? Like I don't know who's saying the most. I just know who are certain strong shot callers because I know they shot call and their teams are doing well, so you can kind of like deduce that they must be doing something well. And I played pubs with some of these guys. I've heard some of the stuff they say. Um, I think a lot of teams have very strong communicators. I don't know if it's something you can gauge either, where it's like this guy's a stronger communicator than someone else, right? It's a lot about how they do what they do for their team. Um, like I think Snaking undoubtedly does a lot for Tundra because I know I've played with that guy and he's a very strong shot caller and he can control the games just through the communication alone. I think Save and Nightfall for Betboom do a lot. Those two guys are really big shot callers, and they have Toronto Tokyo. So like, those that team is just chocked full of them, which could be an interesting dynamic. Um, I also look at I did have another player in mind. I mean, Quinn is a very strong shot caller too. I think undoubtedly he does a lot for gaming. He's a mid player who talks a lot, which is pretty rare. But he will control a game. Like he will win you a game from minute 0 to 30 if everything goes according to his plan. Um, I think Boxy's very strong for Liquid, and so is Zai. I think Zai is probably had to up his communication in terms of like leadership more this year because they lost Matumba, who I considered one of the greatest shot callers probably of all time if you look at the track record. So I think Zai stepping in that role has been pretty impressive, and he's done very well. Uh, and he's a very good communicator. Even going back to like the EG teams where I coached him and he was playing four and stuff, he always talked a bit, and his calls were very good. He was a very succinct communicator. His calls were almost right a lot of the times. That's a good basis, you know. If he's expanded on that over the years and become even more vocal and stuff, which I don't doubt he is, that's a pretty damn good 3-4 punch to have, and it's probably a reason Liquid's done as well as they have, right? Um, so I think every successful team has like some form of it, you know. I don't know if it's that easy to say some players better at it than others. Um, I think Seb is still up there as one of the goats in terms of communication, both in and out of game. I think everybody respects him for that. It's pretty much like that's one I can universally speak on. That guy is just a beast in terms of communication. Like he will rally you in the game, he'll rally you out of game, whatever it takes. He'll get your team there and probably say the right thing with the highest percentage of being the right thing of anybody, right? I think people have faith in him to do that, which gives it even more credence. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy at a certain point. And he won it twice, so he's got the track record to back it up. So yeah, I think he is still up there as probably who the people talk about as the best communicator in some ways of all time. But I think it's very team dependent, and I mean, there's a lot of good shot callers now. It's not just like these five captains like it used to be. There's some pretty damn good core shot callers. Which shot calling when you're a core is not as easy. It's definitely not as easy. Um, so I always respected those guys.
Looking back at your career one more time, given all of the things that we talked about, and also your past career, and all the teams that you've been in, what is one thing that you feel you could have done differently?
Honestly, not like I wouldn't really say I would have done something differently because I just don't think if I knew I would have if I knew what I know now, I would have done things differently, but I didn't know it at the time, and I'm not sure how I would have known it at the time. Right? So like that's kind of just life. Like I feel like I did my best. I tried my best in a lot of the situations I was in. I did the most with what I knew, and that's like the most you can do. And so therefore I don't really think I'd do anything differently. Like I have more knowledge now, so if I went back, I would make different decisions. You know, I probably wouldn't kick snaking. I probably wouldn't. I would probably lead my teams differently. I would make different draft decisions. I would make different decisions in terms of our team environment or which orgs we worked with or all this stuff. But like, I, there's no way I could have made those decisions at that time because I just didn't know. I didn't understand enough to make them. So it's like a double-edged sword. You know, you can always look back at life and be like, oh, I would have done this and this, but I can also look back and say, how would I have known to do that in this? You know, I just don't see a path where I would have. That's what I would change. If there was something I could have said, you know, if I had done this and then I would have understood how to have accomplished this better, I would do that. But I'm not sure what it was. Maybe just try and learn more from other players, I guess, would be the answer. Like if I could go back and appreciate the fact that I got to be on teams with like some of those early EG guys that were world class players that understood way more than me and like really just try and extract as much as I could out of them or be more aware of it. Maybe that's what I would change. But that's also something where I just didn't really recognize it at the time, you know. It wasn't that I was definitely learning from them, you know. I'd go in there and try and learn from PPD and Fear and Arteezy and these guys all the time, but it's hard to know like what you're even supposed to be learning. This is like, you know, you don't know what you don't know. That's like the game of Dota. It's actually so true. There's so much in Dota that you don't even know is there until you see it or you get beat by it. And then you're like, oh shit, okay. Well, this guy knows way more than I do. I better start learning. But you don't know that going in. You just think you're good. So maybe that's what I would change. But even then, I don't know. It's I don't like regret decisions I made. Even ones I know were wrong. I don't regret them because I don't know how I couldn't have kicked snaking at the time. I've told that to him too. He like he almost agrees with me. It's like, what was I supposed to do? You know, people were gonna kill each other on that team. So it's like I just don't know how I could have made the different decision, even though objectively I know it's incorrect. And I wish I could have been better at the time to have made more of that. That's the only thing I wish.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of just recognizing what it is that you should have done, what could have done, what it is you had at the table, and just, just say, well, whatever, what's done is done. You just got to move on and just
Yep.
continue building off of that. And, as you said, it's just, and also how I see it, it's just a matter of getting humbled and just learning what it is that made that possible. And you and like others, countless others have experienced that sort of humbling and getting humble throughout, each player's perspective or each player's respective careers and stuff like that. And so, um, when it comes to comparing being a caster, player, and a coach, um, what do you think was the hardest role that you did? Which one was the hardest for you?
I think they're different in their own ways, but I think coaching is honestly the hardest because I think it's so nebulous a lot of times. Like it's just a very undefined role, even now. Back then it was completely undefined, but nowadays it's more defined, but it's very tough. Like you go in there, you can do so much. You can work on so many different things on a team. You can be a personal coach, you can be a life coach, you can be a mentality coach, you can be a sports psychologist, you can be a drafter, you can be a captain, you can work on game mechanics, you can work on laning, you can work on anything in the game, you can work on individual like it's so broad and at the same time you have to pick and choose. And if you pick wrong, you can sink your team. If you pick right, you can make them champions. It's everything in between. It's very difficult. And at the same time, it's very stressful because you're watching something outside of your control. You're sitting on the sidelines watching a game that's outside of your control. You're facing the same criticism a lot of times as your team when you lose, and you get almost none of the admiration when you win. So, like you win, it's very rare a winning coach gets equal praise to the team. Now, there's some in history, right? You look at YawaR, Seb, AUI, I think are the big three. Okay, they've gotten a lot of praise because they've won big, they've won TIs, and like people basically assume they're very good coaches, which has been proven true. But otherwise, like, not a lot, right? Are people giving Sunby praise for Talon getting top three at multiple events? Are people giving the coaches from these CIS teams praise, right? Like Bulk, and are they giving Silent praise? Like this Silent guy is probably an absolute beast, right? He won a TI. They've won Riyadh. It's like you're on one of the best teams ever. Like, does anybody know what he does? Does anybody say, "Oh, Silent with the drafts really got him"? Nobody ever says this, right? It's just like you're just there, and so you don't get the praise. At the same time, if your team collapses, you feel the extra stress and pressure because you take that criticism to heart. It's a very tough job, and very, very tough. You need to have a lot of respect and trust from your team to feel good about it. Um, and I think that's something that is hard for coaches to figure out until they experience like the ups and downsides of it. And then once you figure that out and you've matured, the job becomes a bit better. But especially for new coaches, that's very tough. So I think in that sense, it's like the hardest. But I think playing is the most. I think playing is the most stressful in terms of like it just takes over your life, right? Like it's just you have to live Dota to win a TI. There's no way around it. It has to become your life, your passion. You have to put other stuff to the side. You have to put life to the side, relationships aside, whatever it is. And that's what makes it stressful, not necessarily the actual playing part. Because for me, playing wasn't stressful. It was the fact that it took 18 hours a day for like 4 years in a row. It's like my brain is turning into Dota. I don't like this. Um, and I think the talent side relieves a lot of that. You can have a life and be talent. It's more like a traditional job in some sense. You can have relationships, you can have downtime. It does not consume your brain for the better. um, but talent is also more stressful in terms of feedback. As a player, I did not care what the community thought to a 0%. I do. I get last place at LAN, and there's like some thread with a billion comments or some hate messages in my Twitter DMs about how I lost so many money or whatever. Zero cares. It did not affect me at all, and I think that's true for a lot of players, not for everybody, but for a lot, just because like, so what? I'm here trying my best and competing, and I'm just going to see how well I can do. And it's there's very few people in the world who understand Dota at that level, so you don't really give them too much credence. But as a talent, that feedback affects your job. Like, it affects people that are hiring you. It affects other people's perception of your hireability or the product you're producing. Your product is also to make the viewer experience enjoyable for them. So if you feel like you're making it unenjoyable for people, that feels really bad. Like, you're ruining it for somebody, right? So that's the stressful part about being a talent, is that you are locked in a lot more with public perception, other people's feedback, uh, that type of thing, and you kind of have to pay attention to it and use it, and that can be a big stress factor for a lot of people. There's a lot of talent that get affected by it, even though it's easy to say, like, oh, well, it's just people on the internet saying random stuff, but like, you have to listen to feedback, because that's your job, is interacting, creating a product for people, right? So that's just the job. And that's something that I did not experience as a coach or player, or at least I personally didn't care about as much. But obviously, it is a factor. Like, there are coaches and players that receive huge amounts of criticism and hate. I'm not taking anything away from that. I'm sure it affects them to the same degree. I'm only speaking from my personal experience, that it was, for me, that was very chill as a player or coach, and as a talent, I feel it more.
And Dota 2 is a game in which the fans basically measure success in terms of how many TI wins have you gotten, since due to how the DPC is formatted and how the distribution of the prize pool has been for the past like 10 or so years. Um, all the focus is on TI, and it's basically gotten to the point of which, if it's a matter of, if you win TI, then you're one of the best. If you don't, then screw you. I don't know anything about you. And then even for some that do win TI, they still won't get as much praise as you mentioned with Silent, from him being the coach of Team Spirit during TI
Mhm.
10. And it has me to wonder about how um success is measured when it comes to players and then coaches' talents and whatever. And for you, who has been on this pursuit of success, both as a player and I think as a caster, I'm not sure if you um prescribe to the notion that you're looking for success as a caster, or maybe you do. How do you measure success for you at this moment in time?
I mean, yeah, you don't have results to go back on, like you said, which is the easiest metric, but I still think that's kind of a fool's metric in Dota. Like, when you look at players and you look at the results and you judge them on that, you are blinding yourself to how good people are and their potential. Um, the easiest recent example is Quinn, right? How many teams looked at Quinn at last TI and looked at the results, looked at his history of results, and went, this guy is irrelevant? There's one team that looked at that guy and said, hey, this guy actually looks pretty good in the games. Like, maybe his team isn't great, but like, he actually looks pretty high skill. He talks a lot. We've heard good things about him, whatever. That was gaming. It worked out for him, right? Like, if you only look at results, you're going to miss some things. And the second you miss something, it might be that small advantage that costs you a tournament or a TI down the road. I think it's like a foolish thing to do in Dota, because results in Dota are so dependent on so many factors, some of them even outside of your control, like a patch, which heroes get buffed or balanced, where a tournament takes place, if you're jet lagged, your team's conditioning and environment, if players are sick. I mean, how many TIs I've heard where a team goes to a TI and one of their players gets sick on a random day and they're just screwed, right? I mean, there's so many factors. So you're looking at results. Are you really telling me you're taking all of that into account, right? There's no way. It's better to just watch a player play. Go and watch his replays. Look at what he does. Study his game. See the heroes he plays. Sees how he plays them. How does he itemize? Why is he itemizing a certain way? How does he use it? Does it pan out? Like, is he thinking correctly about where he wants to be on lane? How he's playing certain waves? How he's CSing? You'll tell very fast. If you understand Dota and you do those things, you can tell very fast how good someone is. And a lot of times it'll surprise you, right? There can be very good players on terrible teams, be very terrible players on very good teams. It happens the other way around too. I can tell you, there's been some teams that have won some really big major lands, and some of the guys on it they were not up to par. Now that doesn't mean they were not championship players, because obviously they were providing a huge amount of value to that team in some capacity. But like, they could do things that were just terrible, right? Maybe their laning is just atrocious. And I can tell you, there's been championship players, their laning was just the worst you've ever seen. But Obviously, they make up for it in other areas, so it's fine. But then you have to be able to recognize that, right? If you're a team that only looks at laning in players, you're never going to take someone for your team that has bad laning. But that might be the guy that is the best player to come out of this generation, and you just overlooked him because he gets 10 less CS, and you don't like how he plays the lane, you know? So, like, results oriented thinking is. It can be a problem in Dota. It's a problem in a lot of areas in life, but in Dota, yeah, it definitely affects a lot of things. And oftentimes, the best players that have ever come into Dota have been the players people are willing to give a chance on because they see the potential in their gameplay and not their resume or results. Um, and so I think from a talent side, obviously you don't have that to measure. I think I measure my success based on, partially feedback, how I feel people are receiving the product, Cap's feedback and his perception on how good the product is means a lot to me. I'll ask him, was this cast good? Was it bad? How good do you think it was? Were there parts of it that were good? Are these aspects improving? You know, that stuff. What the other talent tell me from their perspective. You have to use these things to gauge a lot more for sure. And then it's your internal feel. Like I feel success when I feel like we get really good series and really hype tournaments that tournament organizers and fans trust us to cast, and we deliver on it. I consider that success, no matter where that matches. It can be a lower bracket elimination, it can be a grand final, it can be an online qualifier game. I don't care what it is. I just want to deliver the best product for what that game is in that time and what it needs, you know? If it needs some super clowny 80-minute shit talking, then I'm going to try and do that. If it needs the most serious cast of all time, I'm going to try and do that. That's also part of what I'm trying to gauge. But if I get it like spot on and nail the vibe, the feel, the hype, all that, that's what I'm looking for to be successful.
Would it be fair to say that when it comes to looking for that perfect balance of all the things that you described in the final set of sentences in your previous answer, would that be fair to say that that is your ultimate goal when it comes to being a caster in particular at this point in your career? Or do you have another ultimate goal that you have in mind? And if so, what is it?
For me, that's the real goal is to just become the best, like the best casting pair possible. That's it. There's like some competitive underlying aspect there that people will look at and be like, oh, people always like to, who's the best casters? Who's the best casters? I don't really view it in that sense, because I think it's about bringing something unique and different to the table. Like I don't want to do what Owen and Fog do, right? I don't want to do what Cinder and Suns fan do. I want to do what me and Cap do. I want to make that as good as possible. That's it. Um, and just make that as enjoyable as possible. And I think that's the cool thing about Dota casting is like we can have these different pairs that bring different things and different aspects, and that is variety, and that makes everybody better because then it's not all overlapping and bringing the same thing, and people are getting bored of it, right? So that's how I view it. There's part of me that would think it would be cool to be in a TI Grand Final, even though I think it's unlikely. I will never be disappointed. Like if I do this for X amount of years and I never get to do that, I'm not going to be disappointed I didn't get to do it. Because grand finals are like they're super mixed. In fact, there's a lot of casters that like prefer not doing them because they're very serious, like stressful games that a lot of times grand finals are also one-sided. It's just it's a different vibe. It's very weird. Um, so some casters actually prefer to do like, you know, matches where you can joke around a bit more, have more fun. Not that you can't do that in a grand final, but it just feels more natural, I guess. Um, but I would still like to maybe do one. I think it'd just be fun to be in a TI grand final experience, you know, because I never got there as a player or coach. Maybe I can get there as a caster, you know. I got to try all the angles.
To be fair, you did make like upper bracket finals, deep in the lower bracket
Yeah,
in
yeah.
TI. But as a caster, but still, it's still something to tip your hat on or tip your hat towards. Given that you were able to reach this point despite having like a little less than like 2 years or 3 years in as being a caster. So yeah, it's quite commendable on that part in particular. And as you mentioned, TI-12 going back into to Seattle after like a period of 6 years. 6 years, I think, since it was the last time at TI-7. I think I might be right on that.
Yeah,
But
so 5 years.
Uh, I know TI8 was in Vancouver, so no, that's in 2018. I'm pretty sure it was in TI7 was the last one in Seattle.
Ah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, you're right.
And yeah, TI12, Seattle. I'm gonna try to attend the event. Hopefully, try to talk to some players, but that's neither here nor there. Um, about TI12, what does it mean for you to possibly return to the key arena and this time cover the event as a caster and not just as a player as before?
I mean, it'll be very cool. Sure, there'll be a lot of nostalgia for people, a lot of old memories. Like those were my first TIs. Were in that arena multiple times. Um, I'm sure it probably looks different too because they remodeled it. I don't know what that'll do, but I just think some of the coolest Dota experiences ever were in that place with the mixed crowd. I hope it's a similar type of crowd. I think it generates some very cool East versus West hype. It's very mixed in terms of like every team gets rooted for. It's a very large stadium with the Coliseum vibe that I think people grew very familiar with. So there's a lot going for it. I think if we get some crazy games in that arena with like 10,000 plus people and the stadium's going crazy, it will be really, really fun to cast those games. So that's what I'm looking forward to the most. Just make the most of the games we get there and hope they're really good, and that's all you can really do.
And you've distinguished a variety of teams early on in the conversation about their placement and how they stand relative to each other in TI12. Then I gotta throw you the hard question. Who do you view as the favorite, and also who do you view as the winner of that event?
I mean, the favorite on paper is probably Gaiman. Um, Winning three majors makes you the favorite. I don't really care what anybody says. That's that is just a ridiculous amount of consistency. Um, I actually would not be surprised to see Team Spirit make another decent run or claim it if it's like another one of those tournaments they just show up at like Riyadh. Like that team is always capable. Um, I think Bet Boom are also capable, but it just feels like they run into some glitch somewhere in like the deep part of the brackets. I don't know what it is. Maybe they'll iron it out. Again, I wouldn't be surprised to see those players win it. But something about that team runs into some glitches. And Liquid is probably like gonna be top 3 or 4. They've also been equally as consistent the game in the whole year. So they have a very solid shot of making it as well. I mean, if there's a dark horse that's gonna do it, I don't know. I actually just I think it's really hard for Dark Horse to win it this year because the top teams have just been so consistent.
I mean,
Like
then
I just don't know what it'd be.
but then again, Dark Horse's teams, usually on a good day, they end up winning the tournament. We have some past track records of this happening. So
Yeah, yeah,
I will never discount the dark horses in
that's true.
in any consideration or in any manner, because like I think I said this before, but it's in TI where nothing makes sense, and I still hold on to that belief, if the possibility exists in which a North American team may win it. I mean, who knows? But yeah, still, it's a good a good cast of teams that have the potential to win the event and take home the ages and stuff like that. Um, I want to get your thoughts on the difference in the format of TI12, given that um it's we're not going to have as much days on the main stage compared to past events. I think it's going to be the same thing as last year, in which we have like finals weekend and then um we have like 4 series or 5 series in total, in which it'll be held in like the main stage
Mhm.
area. So what did you think of that difference in format compared to past TI events?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't really like talking about formats too much before we actually see them play out because sure Valve have their reasoning for it or whatever it is. A lot of it was also based on making it easier to watch for viewers at home, which is the majority of the viewership. So if that ends up being the biggest boon, it could be really good even if there's less games for like us being there, right? Everything's a trade-off. So I don't really know. I I mean, I still wish there were more days in the big arena with the big crowd. I also understand the trade-offs of that, and like I do remember some of those days. The whole thing wasn't filled, right? Like people like to act like these big arenas get filled every day, but it was never 100% the case. Um, but obviously, that's what everybody wants in an ideal world. Like you have a huge arena with 20,000 people that's filled for like 7 days. I just don't know how realistic that is or what the trade-offs are logistically, and they're gonna have their own rationales for what things are worth it and which aren't. And I mean, that's just what we have to work with. But either way, I'm just gonna make the most of whatever games we have to cast and make them as hype as possible and see what goes from there. I think at least getting back to Key Arena for the last 3 days will be pretty damn hype regardless. So, maybe you're missing 2 or 3 in there, but you have another venue, and I think the fact that Key Arena will be there at the final 3 days will make that more hype as well. Because I think Singapore people just didn't know like really what was happening. So now they're a bit more used to it. I don't know. It could work out. We'll see. There'll probably be some things that work. There'll probably be some things that don't work and are bad. But I just don't like sitting here and like trying to guess what they are before I see it. That's not like kowtowing to Valve in terms of, oh, they know what they're doing. I don't know if they know what they're doing, but I just genuinely, some of these things just they work out surprising, and some of them that I think are going to be good are probably going to be like the worst aspects of it. So I genuinely have no idea.
Yeah, it's just speculation at this point moment in time. We'll just see how the event trend unfolds when it happens in October in a few months' time. And also another thing I want to touch upon when it comes to TI12 is, of course, as a former NA pro player, I got to know your thoughts on NA. Does the region have a chance? I'm just gonna put it like that. Does the region have a chance of doing anything at all
At
within
TI?
within this event? Yes.
No. Not really, to be honest. I don't know. I mean, no, not really. Maybe they get like a top 8. That's like that would be a good outcome, I think. I think the teams are just they're not looking hot, man. The region's not looking hot, the meta's not looking hot. They haven't done a lot in a while. I guess Shopify is still the best chance for a deep run if they get their shit together, but it's been on a downward trajectory. I don't know if they would tell you how confident they are in terms of going super deep. I wouldn't rule out like a top 8 or top 6 from them, but I don't think they're going to be, I don't think they are beating like the top 4 to 6 teams in that event on paper right now. So my expectations for NA are not too high. But hey, if it crashes and burns, then something good will be rebirthed from the ashes. So that's something to look forward to. These things are all cycles; they go in circles. NA is just on a really long cycle. We're just on that really big oval. We're coming around eventually. That's my hope. But for now, my expectations are not high, and I think it would be foolish to say otherwise.
Do you have any hope for the third North American team that will qualify from the qualifiers? We have announced that qualified for Bali Major, and then we have
Mhm.
another contender that this wild card who just brought in Taiga um, as a substitute for that portion of the season. So, is there any sort of change in hopes when it comes to the third qualifying team?
I mean, maybe not too much outside of that realm. I think Nouns are wild card if they qualify. They can definitely take games off people. Like Nouns didn't do too bad at Bali group stage, right? These aren't teams that are going to go to some land and just go like 0 and 15, right? It's just they're not trash. They're still solid teams. I just think you're lacking a lot of land experience. You're lacking a lot of ability to work on the bigger stuff because you're still in a process where you're just trying to make your team as good as possible. Like everybody's trying to get better individually. You're trying to figure out how to play at a high enough skill level to compete with these teams. And when you're doing that, you don't have a lot of mental freedom to work on the big picture stuff. And that's the stuff that gets you deep in tournaments. So I think it's hard for them to make deep runs, but I would not be surprised to see my old friend Lelis, lead his nouns to like a ninth, 12th, or maybe even a top 8 on a really good day. I think the potential's there. It's not a high probability, but it's not out of the question.
And of course, I have as much, or not as much as you, but I have high hopes. for the region to do well. You might call me mentally deranged, but I don't care. I'm just one that follows the region blindly as a fanatic. But
I mean, I hope they do well too. I hope they do well. I'm just being realistic. I'm not hating though.
yeah, sure, but like you know the game more than I do, and you know the pro scene more than
Yeah,
I do. There's credence behind what you say, and it's not one that I will discount overwhelmingly. So
sure.
still North America, hopefully you guys do well in TI 12 with the home region. Maybe something changes from past events, but still we'll see how it goes. Sticking on to North America, but not just in TI 12. Um, at this moment in time, I want to grab your thoughts on the current state because it's a sort of discussion that's been going around like a broken record about how it's not a good region and doesn't really cultivate a healthy scene, doesn't really create a lot of players, a lot of young players, a lot of talent. It's one that brings in a lot of imports from various other countries outside of the region and also within. I've had the pleasure of talking to a few players that have been competing within the region. Obviously, the biggest examples are RCY with Wildcard a few days ago, and then also
Mm,
Nine, a Mexican player for San King Gomez, and
mm,
just out of curiosity of him, representing Mexico within and competing within the North American DPC scene. And so, even so, when it comes to its current state, one can't deny the contribution that it has had towards the international or the general pro Dota scene over the years, given that it has given us EG, it brought home a TI title in TI 5. It's spawned very well known and very well regarded players. Biggest examples are Fear, Snake King, Quinn, yourself to an extent, and many other players. Arteezy, of course. How can I forget about that dude? And
of course.
it's a very interesting position that North America finds itself in as we reach like year 10 or we reach the 13th edition of the international. And so I want to ask you, how do you view North America's place within the general competitive Dota scene, taking in its history and the present state?
I mean, it's just a wild card. I don't know. I mean, NA's pretty much has 1 to 1.5 teams at any given point that can do something on land. If they do really well, they can do really well. They can win it all. If they don't, they kind of just suck. There's not a lot of in between. There's not a lot of consistency. A lot of that is based on star power that existed at specific points in time, mainly behind Arteezy and Crit coming in from Europe, and behind Sumail coming in for the early EG. Obviously, a lot of the other guys on those teams were tremendous players as well, but those were like probably the two big kickstarters for a lot of stuff, right? And it's just been flash in the pans. Like, you have these Eternal Envy stacks that can do some crazy stuff on land sometimes. Um, I mean, you had like Fear Universe, Peter's Eye. That team was pretty damn good for a long time as well. You had the Fear era where sometimes it's overlooked, but that version of EG got 3 first and 3, right? That's pretty damn good. There's not a lot of teams that have done that consistently well at a stretch of TIs as they have, outside of maybe OG and Liquid. So like NA's honestly done okay over the grand scheme of things in Dota history. It's not been that bad considering it's a much smaller player base and Dota isn't really the biggest game in North America. It's just not. Like even compared to League, it's just not anywhere close. So you have to kind of calibrate your expectations to that as well. Whereas for China and Russia particularly, Dota's huge. It was huge there historically, right? You had massive player bases to draw from. It's still very big, to some degree in China, not as much, but in CIS it's extremely popular still. In Western Europe, it's doing very well. In C, it was huge for a long time as well, and it's still big there. It's died a little bit to mobile, but like all of these places, even SA, like the Peruvian Dota scene is top notch, right? So it's like thriving almost everywhere except North America historically. So the fact that that's been the case, I feel like NA's honestly done reasonably well considering its position. Like this is not an easy position from a competitive standpoint. You have a lot of disadvantages. So I don't know. I think that's kind of its place. Like it's there to throw some upsets every once in a while. There to field one like really top tier team that does pretty well on land and can be a threat. And I think anything beyond that's too much to hope for, and anything less is disappointing. But hopefully we're somewhere in the middle consistently. And if anything, we provide some good storylines. You know, like you said, a lot of the big NA players have provided some pretty good stories and drama over the years. So at least we got that going for us, which is it generates interest in the game. It's valuable, right? Um, and I think that is something that some regions have lacked. Like that said, NA players have also done very little content over the years, which is disappointing. I think they could have done a lot more, but they've had some good storylines, so it's a trade-off.
And it's a very interesting trade-off indeed. And we're wrapping up all of my questions here. I just have I think one more to ask.
Sure.
It's one that I ask all of my past um interviewees so far as my current series of videos is involved. It involves the future, and so where do you see yourself in 5 years from now?
Hopefully, still involved in Dota. Dota's here in 5 years. If it is, I'll probably be here. I really enjoy what I do. I like this game. I think it's a really cool, unique job. I get to meet a lot of really cool people, fly around the world, do awesome stuff. If Dota's here, I'll 99% be here, honestly. Um, and if it's not, I have no idea. Maybe something else in the gaming industry, but I could also see myself just going into something completely different, go back to school, or uh, just go into some completely different field. But I don't know. I'd like to try and utilize like the skills and relationships and stuff I've built in Dota for something. You know, even if Dota dies, which I don't think it will, but even if let's say my job is no longer as uh, incentivized or sustainable or whatever it is, then I would still like to use the contacts and the skill set I built for like transition some of it into something, you know, whatever it is. Uh, and then at least I feel like I'm, you know, you're building something over the course of your life, right? You're progressively upping your skill set and using it for more stuff and being more creative. I think that's like a good progression to have. I think it'd be sad if in 5 years I wasn't using anything I've learned from any of these experiences for what I was doing, which might not be bad, but it might feel little underwhelming, I guess. So that's my hope, but we'll see. I'm very chill. I'm a go with the flow person, so whatever happens, happens. I'm sure I'll be okay in 5 years.
Yeah, whatever happens, happens. And um, whenever something does happen in Dota, we'll be sure to have SVG cover the whole thing before, during, and after the fact. Thank you so much, SVG, once again for taking the time doing this interview. Once again, I do not know who I'm going to have next time for the interview. It might be someone from Dota, it might be someone from another game. I'm not sure, but still, we'll see what happens in the future. But in any case, I've been Pedro Romero. That's been SVG. And thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.